Chapter 30:14. This place was like a gloomy place, an extremely enormous abyss that seemed boundless. It was gloomy and ghastly, and its aura was suffused with an indescribable heaviness and ghastly coldness, causing Chunzong's entire body to be unable to help but tremble. Immediately, Chunzong was shocked to find that his powerful cultivation strength had disappeared. It was not that he could not use it, but that it had disappeared completely. He could not find it or sense it. For a moment, Chunzong even felt a sense of panic from the bottom of his heart. After all, although he had encountered such a situation before, he had never been so thorough. Either he had fallen into an illusion and could not sense his cultivation, or his cultivation had been temporarily restrained and could not be mobilized. But now, Chunzong felt that his cultivation had completely disappeared, as if his cultivation had been abolished. The world in his body was completely gone, and so was the tyrannical supreme sword essence. The panic in his heart dissipated in an instant, and Chunzong regained his calmness. It was impossible for his cultivation to disappear. There was only one explanation, and that was that there was a mystery in the tower. This mystery was too profound and unfathomable, completely beyond his understanding. That was why it was like this. As long as he left the tower, his cultivation should be able to sense it again. Thinking of this, Chunzong tried, but he was shocked to find that he could not leave the tower. There were no hints, nor any information to speak of. Chunzong was at a loss for a moment. For example, what kind of existence was this tower? For example, how could he get out of here? The lack of key information made Chunzong very passive. His powerful cultivation of the inner world had disappeared. He had lost his powerful strength to rely on, and he was empty-handed. His safety was not guaranteed, because even the divine storage device was sealed by a force and could not be used. In other words, Chunzong could not take out swords and other things from it. Taking a deep breath, Chunzong took a step forward. It was not a good idea to stay still in such a place. He had to move, walk, and look around. Maybe he would find something. The light here was very dim. Without his cultivation, Chunzong's range of vision was also greatly affected. It was difficult for him to see further. 100 meters was almost the limit. In this case, if he encountered any danger, it was really difficult for him to react. However, he could not really stay still because it was meaningless. Only by walking could he get more information and find a way to leave the tower. As for whether or not he regretted stepping into the tower, Chunzong wouldn't regret it, because when he entered the tower, he was clear-headed and made a decision very clearly. There was no deception from illusions or coercion from others. Since it was his choice, he had to bear the corresponding consequences. The ground here was somewhat uneven, causing Chunzong to feel as if he was walking on a wasteland. There were low-lying areas, gravel, sparse grass, and so on. The surroundings were silent, so silent that it was difficult to hear anything. Only the sound of his own footsteps could be heard. In such an empty and gloomy place of deathly stillness, the sound of his footsteps seemed to be increasingly clear. Suddenly, Chunzong stopped, and his body froze. There was a touch of shock on his face, and his eyes widened slightly. What appeared in front of him? Chunzong saw it. What was that? It was a huge body that was more than 1,000 meters long. It was lying on the ground like a small hill, as if it was sleeping. Chunzong did not move, but stared carefully and tried his best to sense it. Finally, he was sure that the giant beast was not sleeping, but was dead. The giant beast's body, which was more than 1,000 meters long and more than 100 meters high, seemed to be intact. It also emitted an indescribable and amazing power which shrouded the giant beast. When Chunzong stepped forward again, he felt the remaining power even more strongly. It was so strong that Chunzong felt like he was suffocating. But Chunzong still walked forward against the strong power. He got closer to the giant beast's body and observed it more carefully. Judging from the remnants of its power, this giant beast must have been a saint-level giant beast when it was alive. As for whether it was a minor saint or a great saint, Chunzong could not tell. After all, his cultivation was gone, and his perception was greatly weakened. It was already his limit to be able to tell that it was a saint-realm giant beast. Withstanding the strong power, Chunzong spent some time circling the giant beast. After careful observation, he was sure that the giant beast was killed, because Chunzong saw several huge wounds below the giant beast's abdomen. Each wound was more than 10 meters long, and it was so deep that the bones could be seen. It was dark, and it was dried blood. Judging from the shape of the wounds, they were torn by claws. It was a very big claw, a very big claw. This discovery made Chunzong break out in a cold sweat. If he still had his cultivation and strength, then it was not impossible for him to fight against such a giant beast. He might even be able to win. But now he could not feel his cultivation, and he did not even have a sword in his hand. Once he encountered such a giant beast, he would most likely die. Even if these Saint Realm giant beasts were like him, they would also lose their powerful cultivation when they entered here. But their huge bodies alone were enough to crush many. Most of the time, the difference in size was a kind of suppression. For example, if two people, one 50 kilograms and the other 250 kilograms, had the same strength and were both ordinary people, could you say that the 250 kilograms one was weaker than the 100 kilograms one? It was unknown whether the 100 kilograms one could knock the 250 kilograms one back. But if the 250 kilograms one collided with the 100 kilograms one, under the weight, the 250 kilograms one would directly be knocked upside down and vomit blood. What's more, the difference between his body and the giant beast wasn't just a difference of 50 kilograms and 250 kilograms, but a difference of more than 1,000 times. Just a single claw from such a giant beast was enough to make him unable to withstand its weight. Thinking of this, Chunzong's face became more and more solemn. Although he was serious, Chunzong didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. It was better to continue walking and look for clues to see if he could find any useful information. In addition, although he had lost his cultivation, he was still able to resist. At least, he still had the attainments in swordsmanship that had been tempered thousands of times. Out of the range of pressure of the giant beast's corpse, Chunzong felt relaxed. He looked around. It was still dark, like an abyss, and he could not hear any other sounds. It was like a dead place. Not long after, Chunzong saw a sword. Unfortunately, it was a 9-meter-long sword, which was the weapon of the giant expert. This sword was incomparably heavy and 9 meters long. It was several times taller than Chunzong himself. He simply couldn't lift such a weapon. Even if his cultivation was restored, the weight wouldn't be a problem. However, the length and width of the sword were completely inappropriate. Give up. Not long after, Chunzong saw another corpse. It was the corpse of a giant without a head. The giant's huge body was kneeling on the ground, which looked very terrifying. Corpse, corpse, corpse. Chunzong walked all the way and saw corpses. There were giants' corpses and giant beast corpses. These giant beasts were all different. Some were like tigers, some were like galloping horses, and some were like goshawks. But no matter what kind of giant beast they were, their bodies were very huge, and the remaining aura was very shocking. They were at least at the quasi-saint level, and some were at the saint level. Hundreds of corpses. Up to now, Chunzong had seen at least hundreds of quasi-saint level giants and giant beast corpses, and about 10% of them were at the saint level. Chunzong could not help but think of the scene he had seen before. Many giants, birds, and beasts were fighting and killing each other. It was not until the tower appeared that they rushed into the tower like moths to a flame. Then, were the corpses here those giants, birds, and beast corpses? He speculated that it was most likely so. So how did they, or should I say, die? Did they die in a fight? From the hundreds of corpses he had seen so far, Chunzong could infer that a fight had broken out among them, and then they killed other people, beasts, or were killed. Sword wounds, bites, scratches, and so on. The earth was boundless, and the darkness was endless. Every once in a while, Chunzong would see a corpse of a giant, a bird, or a beast. Chunzong picked up a bone. He did not know what beast bone had been broken by a slap. It was more than 1 meter long. It was straight and somewhat flat, and the broken part was a little sharp. It could be used as a sword in Chunzong's hand. Of course, because it was not a real sword, it was not edged, so it was not sharp. Fortunately, the broken part at the end was sharp. In addition, Chunzong had tested it. The broken bone was very hard, and its hardness was amazing. It was not easy to break. Although it was not as hard as his heavenly will sword, it was better than empty-handed. With his bone sword in hand, he could also use his swordsmanship. If he encountered any danger, he would not be unable to resist and fight back. As a sword cultivator, when holding a sword, he could show his true nature. A sword cultivator without a sword was mostly like a toothless tiger. Although they were not weak, they were not enough. A huge figure was standing in front of an even bigger stone. It was a giant, and a giant that was 15 meters tall. Chunzong guessed that it was a powerhouse of the great saint realm. There were no visible wounds on the giant's body, but it was already dead. The cause of death was unknown. Chunzong's gaze passed over the giant's corpse and fell on the huge stone. There were sword marks on it, which should have been carved by the giant's sword. It was written in characters. Chunzong did not recognize the characters, but he had a feeling that he had seen them somewhere before. Finally, he thought of the divine devil script. The characters on the huge stone were somewhat similar to the divine devil script. Therefore, Chunzong used his mastery of the divine devil script to understand them. Is the name of this tower the Heavenly Tower? Chapter 30:15. The characters of the giant tribe were close to the characters of the divine demons. What did this mean? In addition, Chunzong could decipher the characters of the giant tribe in front of him using the characters of the divine demons. He was able to decipher the meaning contained within. The Heavenly Tower. This tower that countless giants and giant beasts fought to break into was called the Heavenly Tower. In other words, at this very moment, he was inside the Heavenly Tower. The characters on the tower were not long, and Chunzong could not understand some of them. Therefore, the information he could obtain was not much. The Heavenly Tower could allow one to become a god. However, the short information he deciphered caused Chunzong's eyes to widen. His pupils contracted and dilated. His face was full of shock and disbelief. Could become a god. Becoming a god was different from becoming a god. It was not the god of the divine demons in the divine demons world. It should be the true god that the sword-sharpening mountain lord had said he yearned to become and had not paid a great price for it. He had planned for millions of years to become a true god. That was Chunzong's guess. A true god. That should be a level above the sage stage. It was a higher level, a more powerful level. If his guess was correct, then the weight of a true god was probably many times greater than he had imagined. Not only did the sword-sharpening mountain lord pay the price for the sword-sharpening mountain, but he had also planned for millions of years to pursue the path of a true god. Chunzong even saw many giant tribe experts and giant beasts fighting to the death. After the continuous fighting, the Heavenly Tower appeared. Then, they all fearlessly rushed into the Heavenly Tower like moths to a flame. Why did they rush in? It was probably because they wanted to become a true god. The attraction of becoming a true god was so great and so shocking. For a moment, Chunzong was extremely excited. Could become a god. His translation should not be wrong, so the information contained in it should be true. Space-time fragments, according to his discussion with the Lightning Sword Saint, were defined as fragments of the past space-time that had been shattered for unknown reasons. They existed in the unknown place. The two of them discussed and speculated again and again. In the end, they concluded that the unknown place existed to serve the space-time fragments. Otherwise, the space-time fragments would lose their power and eventually disappear. For example, in the outer universe, the interlayer universe, and the inner universe, there was no mention of space-time fragments. In the outer universe, Mount Taihao was a holy land, a top holy land. The inner universe was formed by the ancient profound world and the fiend god world. Chunzong didn't know much about the ancient profound world, but based on his limited knowledge, he had never heard of a space-time fragment, except for this unknown place. The universe was divided into the outer layer, the middle layer, the inner layer, and the core. The core universe was the most mysterious. Chunzong had never seen any information about the core universe. There was only one mention, and that was the concept of the core universe. Therefore, there had always been a debate about the existence of the core universe. Some cultivators believed that the core universe was the center of the universe. It was the center of the universe and was in charge of all the operations and laws of the universe. But there were also cultivators who believed that the core universe did not exist. Maybe the universe had a core, but it was only the center that controlled the operation of the universe. It was not the core universe, but the universe core. The names of core universes and universe cores were arranged in a different order, and the meanings they represented were also different. The core universe could represent a world, such as the ancient mysterious world in the inner universe. It had the birth and development of life, the growth and progress of civilization. However, the core of the universe was just a core. It was not the existence of a world, but more like the existence of the central origin. It was a mass without any life being born. So, for the time being, the core universe did exist. What kind of existence was it? Why did so many saint-level cultivators enter it? Well, Chunzong vaguely understood why they entered it. After all, when one cultivated to the extreme, there was no possibility of further progress. They could only travel and seek breakthroughs. The so-called core universe was undoubtedly a good place to go. However, the cultivators who went to the core universe never returned or appeared again. Only some ancient books recorded all kinds of information about them. That was all. The unknown lands. Could it be related to the core universe? A thought suddenly popped into Chunzong's mind. The more he thought about it, the more information there was in his mind. In the end, it became more and more chaotic. After all, Chunzong's cultivation had disappeared in this place. Everything else was affected, including his thinking ability. He could not think of many things at the same time like before. Chunzong felt a faint pain in his head, as if something had pierced it. He had to stop thinking and speculating. All in all, the unknown place was too mysterious. It was no wonder that it was called the unknown place. The unknown place was mysterious, and so was the core universe. If there was a connection between the two, Chunzong would not be surprised. But now, he still lacked enough information. In addition, he had lost his cultivation power, and his thinking ability was greatly affected. Therefore, he could not make more in-depth speculations. He could only stop here for the time being. But one thing he knew was that this tower was called the Tower of Gods. The purpose of entering this tower should be related to becoming a god. Other than that, Chunzong could not get any more information. Withdrawing his gaze, Chunzong carried the bone sword and continued to move forward. Then, he met two people. Two people were fighting fiercely. No, to be precise, it was a man and a divine demon. Chunzong was very surprised that he had met a divine demon again. The fiend gods on both sides also lost their powerful fiend god strength, and their tyrannical fiend god bodies were also greatly weakened. However, fiend gods were innately stronger than humans. Even if they were weakened, the strength they retained was still much stronger than humans. The weapon used by this fiend god was a battle spear. It looked extremely ferocious, and even though it did not have the power of a powerful fiend god to drive it, it was still able to erupt with astonishing power through the superb martial arts of the fiend god. Chunzong immediately came to the conclusion that this fiend god was a fiend god of the celestial god lineage, and a fiend god of the thunder god lineage. The divine demons of the thunder divine system had mastered the divine demon power of thunder. It was an extremely tyrannical and violent power. However, within the sky-reaching divine tower, everything extraordinary had disappeared and returned to normal. Thus, the battle spear was not covered by the power of lightning. However, due to the exquisite fiend god martial arts, every spear strike of the fiend god expert had the power to split the sky apart with a thunderous might. When a cultivator's strength reached a certain level and their mastery of martial arts reached a profound level, even if they did not fuse with extraordinary powers, they would be able to erupt with astonishing power and cause terrifying destruction just by relying on their martial arts attainments alone. As for the person fighting this divine demon, with a sword in hand, the sword light was not dazzling at all. Instead, it had a soft and illusory feeling. It was like clouds and mist. Between the clouds and mist, a ray of light wandered. It was ever-changing and unpredictable, elusive and difficult to catch and deal with. But Chunzong also felt a trace of indescribable sharpness from the ever-changing sword light, as if it could destroy everything. This person was Sword Saint Chu Yun. That must be the 33 moves of the god of killing in the illusory cloud and mist. Shinzong stopped and looked over, secretly amazed. Although it was not supported by cultivation, it could further highlight the mystery of the swordsmanship itself. 33 moves of the god of killing in the illusory cloud and mist. The names of many martial arts techniques were related to their own mysteries. This swordsmanship was called with such a name, which also showed the mysteries in it. It was very fitting. This was also a kind of invisible recognition that came from the way of heaven, the will of the world, or the will of the universe. If the name did not live up to its reality, the martial arts technique would also be affected. For example, it was clearly a strong and powerful martial art, but it had to be given a weak name. It seemed to have the effect of confusing others. Perhaps there were some benefits, such as catching the opponent off guard during the first exchange, but the disadvantages were actually greater. The name was a kind of symbol. The more powerful it was, the more it would become like a brand, like a title. Especially when it reached the supreme realm, it had the same effect as a title. If it did not fit, it would eventually lead to bad consequences, which would lead to regret. In addition, even if others knew some of the mysteries of the martial art technique from the name, so what? Would they be able to resist it if they knew? The strong were strong, and the weak were weak. It would not change because of some small tricks. The swordsmanship of Sword Saint Chu Yun was extraordinary. Its characteristic was that it had a myriad of changes. With so many changes, it would be more difficult to distinguish. With the addition of clouds and mist, the sword chi would turn into clouds and mist to shroud the surroundings. Coupled with the ever-changing characteristics, it became more difficult to deal with and more difficult to deal with. The two words God of Killing had a murderous feeling, which made Shinzong feel that this swordsmanship not only focused on changes and confusion, but also had an amazing lethality. God of Killing could be explained in several ways. One was that it could kill gods, which meant that it had amazing lethality. Another was that it could destroy the divine soul, which was also very terrifying. He just did not know which aspect of the God of Killing finger was in Sword Saint Chu Yun's swordsmanship. Shinzong did not intend to make a move. Instead, he stood in the distance and watched, especially when he saw Sword Saint Chu Yun's ever-changing 33 moves of God of Killing in clouds and mist. This swordsmanship was so exquisite that Shinzong felt that it was an eye-opener. Shinzong looked at it and analyzed its mystery. Unfortunately, because his cultivation had disappeared and other aspects were affected, the efficiency of his analysis was not high. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 30:16. The battle between the divine demon expert from the Thunder God system and the Chuyin Sword Saint was extremely intense. Every move was meant to kill the other party, and there was no mercy. The divine demon of the Thunder God system spear was extremely powerful. His attacks seemed very simple and direct, but every spear carried an extremely shocking power that could shatter everything. Even without the support of the divine demon's power, every spear left streaks of marks in the void at lightning speed, and the shocking air pressure also left streaks of marks on the ground. In addition, the divine demon's body was much stronger than before, so he continued to attack. However, the Chuyin Sword Saint's 33 forms of illusory clouds and mist god slaying 33 forms had reached the acme of perfection. Amidst the myriad of changes, he was able to block the opponent's extremely powerful attack. Shinzong discovered that the cloud of sword light not only served to confuse the opponent, but also had the effect of absorbing attacks. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to resist the violent attack of the fiend god's extremely powerful thunder spear. Finally, Shinzong also observed and analyzed that the god slaying was targeted at the divine soul. Every strike would affect or even attack the opponent's divine soul. However, due to the lack of cultivation power, the effect of attacking the divine soul seemed to be greatly reduced. In this way, the Chuyin Sword Saint was not at a disadvantage at all. However, it would not be so easy to determine the winner. Shinzong thought of another point. Why would the Chuyin Sword Saint and the Divine Demon appear here? Previously, although he and the Thunder Sword Saint had acted together, when they entered the space-time fragment, they did not appear in the same world. Although they entered the same space-time fragment, they did not appear in the same world. Both of them had tested this point and finally came to a conclusion. The worlds contained in the space-time fragment would evolve with the number of people who entered. It was like a physical mirror image. If two people entered, it would form two identical worlds, and two different people would enter one of them. Previously, when Shinzong was on the endless battlefield, he only saw the giant and did not see anyone else. Therefore, he thought that the situation was the same as before. Even if they entered the same space-time fragment, they would not appear in the same world. But now, why did he see the Chuyin Sword Saint and the Divine Demon Expert in the Sky Tower? What was the reason? Come to think of it, the reason he was able to enter the sky-piercing Divine Tower was because he had killed a pristine Saint Stage giant powerhouse. In that case, was it the same for the Divine Demon Powerhouse and Chuyin Sword Saint? The giant expert was very powerful. An ordinary pristine Saint Realm expert wouldn't be able to kill him. At the very least, the Lightning Sword Saint wouldn't be a match for the giant expert if he didn't have a stronger technique. The more Shinzong speculated, the more unknowns Shinzong found. Since his cultivation had disappeared, his mind was limited, so he quickly stopped and dared not to continue speculating. Otherwise, he would feel a headache and unbearable. There was too much information contained in it. In short, after entering the unknown place, Shinzong saw a lot of things that he didn't know about. He didn't know their origins, and so on. It was very mysterious. This sky-piercing tower was undoubtedly the most mysterious existence he had encountered so far. A divine tower that reached the heavens. A divine tower that reached the heavens could allow one to become a god. What kind of shocking information was this? Just thinking about it caused an indescribable feeling of shock to grow in the depths of his heart. The battle between the Chuyin Sword Saint and the Fiend God gradually progressed. It reached its climax and became more and more intense. Every blow contained fatal power. The slightest collision would injure the opponent. However, both of their martial arts attainments were very high, so it wasn't so easy to determine the winner. Suddenly, the Chuyin Sword Saint intentionally or unintentionally revealed a flaw, which was immediately seized by the Fiend God Expert. The Fiend God Expert unleashed a terrifying spear that pierced through the air. It was like a violent thunderbolt, and it directly blasted toward the Chuyin Sword Saint's head with astonishing power. There was no doubt that if the Chuyin Sword Saint was hit directly, his head would explode like a watermelon and he would die immediately. However, since it was the Chuyin Sword Saint who had intentionally or unintentionally revealed a flaw, he naturally took the risk to lure his opponent into attacking him. His figure moved along with the sword in the cloud of sword light and was immediately pierced by the lightning spear, shattering in an instant. However, what was shattered was an illusion formed by the cloud of sword light, not his real body. If he still had his cultivation, the Chuyin Sword Saint could easily create such an illusion. However, he had lost his cultivation and only relied on his swordsmanship. He needed some preparation to succeed. The moment the illusion was shattered, a fine sword light that was condensed to the extreme pierced through the clouds. All the sword shadows in the surroundings were like moths to a flame. They merged into the sword, causing the sword light to become even more dazzling. Kill! The sword was silent but extremely terrifying. The aura it contained was extremely shocking, as if it could slaughter a fiend god. The Fiend God Expert's expression changed drastically. He roared angrily and raised a spear again. He attacked the Chuyin Sword Saint fiercely, as if he was risking his life. As the sword light flashed, it rushed in all directions. Shocking thunder rumbled, accompanied by a muffled groan. Then, a figure could be seen retreating rapidly. Without hesitation, he raised the battle spear in his hand. His arm continued to stretch back, like a strong bow that had been stretched to its limit, and he suddenly threw out. The whistling sound was extremely sharp and mournful, making one's hair stand on end. It directly blasted forward into the light of the cloud. After the demon god threw the battle spear with all his might, he retreated without hesitation. The cloud of sword light dissipated. Chuyun's body blocked the spear and broke it apart. The long sword vibrated and made a series of rapid trembling sounds. Chuyun's face was pale, and the arm holding the sword was trembling slightly. His body was undulating because of his heavy breathing, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. After repelling the Fiend God Expert, the Chuyin Sword Saint was also injured. As for the spear that the Fiend God Expert threw with all his strength, it was stuck to the side. The spear was still trembling slightly and making a slight buzzing sound. The Chuyan Sword Saint had already noticed Qinzong. However, he was fighting fiercely with the Fiend God expert, and Qinzong was a human who entered the unknown place with him. Therefore, he kept a certain distance from him. But now, after repelling the Fiend God expert, the Chuyan Sword Saint's gaze fell on Qinzong. Are you Qinzong of the unparalleled Jindi? The Chuyan Sword Saint did not know that Qinzong's true strength was at the saint level. However, when he saw Qinzong here, he thought of the way he entered. He did not dare to underestimate Qinzong and called him sir. I'm Qinzong. Qinzong smiled and said, but I'm not a Jindi. I'm just like you. Sword Saint. The Chuyan Sword Saint's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a hint of surprise in his tone, but there was also a hint of matter-of-fact. Qinzong could enter here, and then, thinking of how the Lightning Sword Saint invited Qinzong to travel with him, he probably already knew that Qinzong was at the Sword Saint level. This explanation seemed much more reasonable. Since they were both Sword Saints, they were on equal footing. There was no difference in strength or status between a quasi-saint and a saint level. Under equal circumstances, it would be easier to communicate. Before I received the Eternal Sword invitation from the Myriad Sword Mountain, I was planning to go to the Chuyan Sword Sect to find you, Chuyan Sword Saint. I wanted to see the famous 33 moves of the Myriad Illusionary Cloud and Miss God slaying technique. I didn't expect something to happen, so I missed it. Qinzong smiled and said, I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes here. It's indeed extraordinary and unfathomable. You flatter me, unparalleled Sword Saint. The Chuyan Sword Saint replied unhurriedly. Then he sheathed his long sword and said, Your 10,000 swords return to sect path is more admirable. After a round of compliments and pleasantries, it was time to exchange information. After all, one person's strength was too weak. They could only learn more by communicating with each other. However, it was a pity that the Chuyan Sword Sage didn't know as much as Qinzong. There was only one thing that was certain. The Chuyan Sword Sage had also appeared on the endless battlefield, but the space-time fragment that he had entered was different from the one that Qinzong and the Lightning Sword Sage had entered. In this way, there was an explanation. There wasn't only one space-time fragment on the endless battlefield. It could be 2, 3, or even more. These space-time fragments eventually formed the complete endless battlefield. And the endless battlefield in each space-time fragment could give birth to more parallel worlds. In the end, they were all connected to the sky-reaching tower. In other words, the sky-reaching tower was the core of the endless battlefield. Without the ability of parallel worlds, it was the only core and hub. Therefore, Qinzong, the Chuyan Sword Saint, and even the Divine Demon Expert entered the sky-reaching tower from different endless battlefields. As for what tower this was, the Chuyan Sword Saint didn't know. Qinzong told him, Sky-reaching tower. Become a god? After hearing this, the Chuyan Sword Saint was first surprised, then shocked, and in disbelief. It was indeed hard to believe. Of course, this was for the experts of the Little Saint realm. If one reached the Divine Ancestor realm, which was the limit of the holy level, they might know more. This was because they wanted to seek a breakthrough and break through to a higher level. Above the Little Saint realm, there was still the Great Saint realm to break through and the Divine Ancestor realm to continue climbing. Some simple information I saw before is indeed so, but I don't know if it's true or not, Qinzong said calmly. He knew very well that this news would cause a great uproar. It might even cause the other party to draw their sword against him. However, Qinzong was not afraid. Qinzong had seen the Chuyan Sword Saint's ever-changing 33 moves of the god slaying in clouds and mist. He had also made some deductions and comprehended a small part of its mysteries. If they fought, Qinzong was confident that he could suppress the other party with pure swordsmanship. In addition, he told the other party this information to encourage the other party to work harder. Perhaps he could unearth more mysteries of the sky-reaching tower and find a way to leave this place. As for becoming a god, that was too far away. It was better to leave this place first. After exchanging information, the Chuyan Sword Saint didn't propose to go with Qinzong. Qinzong didn't say so either. After the two of them saluted with their swords, they went in different directions. They went farther and farther until they couldn't see each other anymore. They each went to find the mysteries of the sky-reaching tower. Chapter 30:17. There were no stars or moon in the heavenly tower, and there was no alternation between day and night. Looking from afar, it was as dark as an abyss, and it was difficult to feel the passage of time. It was as if time had lost its power here. Shenzong did not know how much time had passed. It seemed like a long time, but when he thought about it carefully, he felt that it was not that long. He could not help but feel a little absent-minded. This made Shenzong feel even more uneasy, and he was even more eager to leave the heavenly tower. As for becoming a god, that was too far away. Throughout the ages, he had never heard of the existence of a true god, except for the secret of becoming a god from the sword-sharpening mountain lord and the saying that he could become a god here. Of course, it could also be that his level was not high enough. But since ancient times, it was extremely rare for someone to become a god. God knew how many years it would take for one to appear. Was becoming a god attractive to him? Yes, it was. It was definitely attractive, but the attraction was not as strong as that of the sword-sharpening mountain lord. At least, what he was seeking now was not to become a god, but to break through to the next big realm. For Shenzong, instead of wasting a lot of time and energy to pursue the elusive goal of becoming a god, it was better to first comprehend the next realm of the inner world and then break through. This was the path that belonged to him, and it was the path that suited him the most. He would go down it firmly, and when he reached the limit, when there was no other way to go, he would consider the so-called method of becoming a god. Looking at the many corpses, Shenzong also saw more of the remaining characters. He used the characters of the gods and demons to make inferences. He roughly understood how much of it he could understand, and the more information he could obtain. The more he knew, the more Shenzong's heart sank. Just as Shenzong stopped to look at some of the characters again, a strong wind suddenly whistled. Immediately, a cold light approached from behind with a shocking killing intent and directly slashed down. This attack was extremely fierce, and its killing intent was awe-inspiring. Its chi completely locked onto Shenzong, leaving no room for escape. Such a sudden, fatal attack. Shenzong's expression was stern, but he did not panic at all. Instead, in an instant, he took small steps, shifted, and turned around, just in time to avoid the fatal attack. The bone sword in his hand stabbed out. It seemed slow, but it was extremely fast. When the bone sword pierced through the air, it let out an extremely sharp whistle, as if it was a demonic sound. At the instant that attack arrived, Shenzong knew that it was a fiend god expert based on his perception of aura. Thus, he turned around and launched a merciless counterattack with the intention of killing his opponent. Although it was only a bone sword and not a real sword, the power it could unleash in Shenzong's hand was not inferior to a real sword at all. The seemingly slow sword suddenly made the god or demon feel that it was impossible to dodge. He could only forcibly stop the fatal attack and turn around to resist the sword. His chi and blood flowed backward, and with a muffled groan, his whole body retreated after the collision of the sword and the saber. Another sword light immediately pierced through the air, piercing through the sky, and once again emitting a sharp sword whistle. The body of the sword flickered with a white luster in the dusky air, causing people to be unable to help but be dazzled and palpitated. That was the color of the bones, and it was filled with an indescribable, deathly aura. This sword showed all the mysteries of the single-hearted swordsmanship. The first sword that turned around to counterattack was Sword 1. Using Shenzong's strength, it also burst out a power that exceeded his own strength. The technique of using strength was very good, and it changed several times in an instant before it repelled his opponent. This was the superb skill of defeating the strong as the weak. Technique. The second sword was Sword 2. Immediately after, Shenzong used Sword 3. Two consecutive sword lights seized the opportunity when the god or demon expert retreated and immediately attacked. The speed of the sword was faster and stronger, but Shenzong also felt more and more burdened. The moves of the single-hearted swordsmanship became stronger the further they were used, but also increased the consumption of one's strength, and the burden on one's body would also be greater. After all, the pure use of swordsmanship relied on one's physical strength. If one's body was not strong enough, it would be harder to use the powerful moves. Sword 2 was blocked by his opponent's saber, but Sword 3 was faster and stronger, beyond imagination. It directly hit the body of the god or demon expert. The body of a god or demon was indeed very strong, but in the heavenly tower, it seemed to have lost its powerful strength. It was immediately pierced and penetrated by the bone sword. Failing to kill and being injured instead, the god or demon expert was furious, but he also felt very aggrieved. His cultivation strength had disappeared, and many of his moves could not be used at all. Otherwise, he would not have ended up like this. Retreat. Since his sneak attack had failed, and his opponent's swordsmanship was so excellent that it directly injured him, if he continued to fight, there was a possibility that he would be killed by his opponent, so he decisively retreated. Under the burst of speed, Chunzong also took a step forward in an instant and directly used the single-hearted swordsmanship. However, when he only took the third step, Chunzong felt a slight tearing sensation from the muscles in his legs, and there was a piercing pain. It was the limit again. The single-hearted swordsmanship could only take the first 3 steps. If he took the 4th step, his legs would not be able to bear it, and his muscles would directly burst open. However, under such circumstances, 3 steps were actually enough. Charge! In just an instant, Chunzong's running speed exceeded the limit, and he turned into a stream of light and chased after his opponent at an extremely fast speed. His body and sword became one, and in an instant he stabbed out 3 more times. The single-hearted swordsmanship's Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3. In an instant, 3 sword lights streaked across different trajectories, stabbing towards the god or demon at almost the same time. The 3 swords were extremely fast, and the god or demon expert immediately dodged with his extraordinary sense of danger. He avoided Sword 1, which was aimed at the back of his head, but he could not avoid Sword 2 and Sword 3, so he was hit one after another. Sword 3 directly pierced the back of his leg, penetrating his knee, causing his body to sway for a moment and tilt to the side. Even his speed was greatly affected. In a situation where one had no cultivation strength, the only thing one could rely on was one's body. If one's body was damaged, it would affect one's condition. Chunzong, who was extremely experienced in battle, would not let go of such an opportunity. Kill! Sword light flashed, and he swung out again. The power of the single-hearted sword technique was pushed to the extreme by Chunzong. The god or demon expert roared again and again. He turned around and attacked with his saber. His aura was extremely fierce, and he looked like he was going to fight with his life on the line. However, it was useless. Chunzong's single-hearted sword technique was too superb, especially after breaking through the shackles and constantly integrating the mysteries of other swordsmanship. Previously, he had comprehended something from observing Sword Saint Chiyun's 33 forms of God, slaying in clouds and mist. He had also integrated that bit of understanding into the single-hearted sword technique, causing the single-hearted sword technique to improve slightly. Under the superb swordsmanship, although the god or demon expert's martial arts attainments were not weak, there was still a big gap between him and Chunzong. It was a good move to put one's life on the line, but it was useless. Under the single-hearted sword technique, Chunzong directly attacked the weak with strength. He pierced through the god's head and killed him directly. After killing him, Chunzong tried again and obtained a strand of divinity. Sure enough, the loss of cultivation was fake. It still existed, but for some reason, he could not sense it and could not use it. It was as if he had lost it. Otherwise, if he had really lost his cultivation, there would not be any divinity left. This divinity was not bad, but unfortunately, it was useless to him now. He had to put it away first. Where should he put it? The storage artifact was not easy to use, so he could only put it in the inner pocket. Fortunately, the divinity would not dissipate. Then, Chunzong took the god saber. Although it was not a sword, it could still exert some power sometimes. Up until now, he had already encountered 2 gods or demons in the heaven-reaching tower, but he had only encountered Sword Saint Chun. The situation inevitably made Chunzong a little worried. Chunzong did not know how big the heaven-reaching tower was. It seemed that he had walked a very, very long distance, but he still could not see the end. If he looked up, it was dark to the point of being pitch black, as if he could not see the top. Inside the heaven-reaching tower, There was not only the earth, but also hills and so on. Except for the fact that there was no sun, moon, and stars, and the four seasons alternated between day and night. It was like a world of its own. As he continued forward, Chunzong saw a flight of stairs. It was a spiral staircase that rose from the ground and disappeared into the darkness above. The spiral staircase seemed to have no end, and he did not know where it led to. Chunzong stood at the bottom of the staircase and looked up. He could only see darkness, an extremely deep darkness. After thinking for a while, Chunzong began to climb the staircase. He did not know how big the heaven-reaching tower was. It seemed that he had walked for a long time, but he still had not found anything. Since he saw the spiral staircase, perhaps he could take it. Maybe he would find something else. Step by step, he kept going up, following the spiral staircase. As he went higher and higher, he gradually disappeared into the darkness above. Even in the darkness, Chunzong's vision was still greatly affected. He could only vaguely see the staircase under his feet. It was difficult to see anything beyond the staircase clearly. Even if he went a little further, it was completely dark. Climbing, continuously climbing. Time seemed to have stopped, but Chunzong felt tired. He felt that the spiral staircase seemed to have no end, but his physical strength was constantly being consumed. When Chunzong's physical strength was almost exhausted, he took a step and found that the staircase had disappeared. It was replaced by a flat land, which looked similar to the previous one. It felt as if he had returned to the original place. After observing for a while, Chunzong could be sure that this was not the original place. Although it looked similar, there were still subtle differences. If that was the first floor of the Heavenspan Divine Pagoda, could this place be considered the second floor? Chunzong suddenly had a thought. If that's the case, how many floors does the Heavenspan Divine Pagoda have? From the outside, the heaven-reaching tower was at least 10,000 meters high. In fact, 10,000 meters was not a big deal. It was just that many treasures had their own space inside, so it could not be measured by the number of meters on the outside. For example, just now, Chunzong had walked for a long time. He was sure that it was no less than 10,000 meters, but he still could not see the end. But from the outside, it did not seem that big. Chapter 30:18. The second floor of the sky-reaching tower did not seem to be much different from the first floor. It was still dark and bleak, and he could still see the corpses of giants and behemoths. However, Chunzong also keenly discovered that the aura of the corpses on the second floor was stronger than that of the first floor. Similarly, the corpses of giants and behemoths on the second floor seemed to be older. On this floor, Chunzong did not encounter any living creatures. He found another spiral staircase, a spiral staircase that kept going up. Without any hesitation, Chunzong continued to climb the staircase. He also walked into the darkness and climbed until his physical strength was almost exhausted. Only then did he reach the next floor, which could be considered as the third floor for the time being. Then, it was the fourth floor and then the fifth floor. Chunzong found that although he could not feel his cultivation in the sky-reaching tower, he seemed to have lost his powerful strength, and his physical strength became limited. However, he did not feel thirsty or hungry. Otherwise, he might die of thirst or starvation here. He found spiral staircase after spiral staircase and kept climbing, one floor after another. It seemed that there was no end to it. How many floors does this sky-reaching tower have? When Chunzong climbed to the sixth floor, he was panting and seemed to be paralyzed with exhaustion. He could only stop to rest and recover his strength while thinking. Could it be that the so-called God Ascension is to reach the top? Chunzong suddenly had such a thought. Ascending to the top could lead to God Ascension. This was somewhat possible. After all, the sky-reaching tower was so attractive that it attracted countless experts like moths to a flame. There must be a great mystery behind it. However, Chunzong had climbed to the sixth floor, but he had not encountered anything. If ascending to the top could lead to God Ascension, would it be easier? Even if the sky-reaching tower had 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 floors, as long as there was no danger, it would only take some time to climb. Compared to God Ascension, spending hundreds or thousands of years was nothing. A practitioner had to go through a lot of hardships, setbacks, and dangers in order to cultivate from a mortal to a sage. How many people had fallen on the way? How many people had failed to reach the sage level when they reached the peak? Who would not want to become a god just by climbing without any danger? This was undoubtedly the smallest price to pay. Becoming a god just by walking. There was no doubt that this was the case, but was it possible? In any case, Chinzong would not believe it. The sword-sharpening mountain lord had paid an enormous price. That was a scheme that involved sword-sharpening mountain as the price. Furthermore, it was a scheme that spanned over 1,000,000 years. When the scheme reached Chinzong's head, after many twists and turns, it still failed in the end. No, there might be a follow-up, but at least for now, it had nothing to do with him. At the very least, he had encountered a huge setback. Even if he wanted to continue, it would not be so easy. Many of the giants and giant beasts that he had seen before had rushed into the heavenly tower to ascend to godhood. But did they become gods in the end? It did not seem so. All Chinzong saw were corpses. So far, there were thousands of corpses lying on every floor of the sky-reaching tower. It could be seen how difficult the road to god ascension was. Was it possible to just climb to the top? Perhaps the sky-reaching tower did not have a top. All in all, Chinzong did not know. Anyway, he just kept searching. He saw some words on every floor, but unfortunately, he could not understand most of them. The few that he could understand did not contain much information. So, until now, Chinzong's understanding of the sky-reaching tower was still relatively shallow. In addition, his thinking ability was limited, so it was difficult for him to speculate much at once. He kept searching and climbing. It should be the 9th floor. Chinzong panted heavily and saw stars. Although he could go without food and drink, the feeling of physical exhaustion was still very strong. Exhaustion swept over him like a tide. Chinzong had to withdraw his previous thoughts. If there were thousands of floors in the sky-reaching tower, it would not be easy to reach the top. After mocking himself, Chinzong seized the time to recover his strength. He kept his breathing rhythm, and his physical strength recovered quickly. Climbing one floor after another, Chinzong clearly remembered how many times he had climbed the spiral staircase. The 89th floor. Chinzong was still panting heavily. He only felt that his whole body was weak and his limbs were weak. He had to rest for a long time. Climbing the 89th floor was also an eye-opener for Chinzong. In addition to the corpses of the giants and giant beasts, Chinzong also found the corpses of the gods and demons and the corpses of the human clan. They were all filled with the smell of decay. Chinzong did not know how long they had been dead. In addition, he also saw some corpses that were not of the gods, giants, beasts, or humans. They were corpses that were similar to the human clan, but different from the human clan. They had different characteristics, and there were more than one type of corpses. At least now, at the 89th floor, Chinzong had seen at least hundreds of corpses of experts of different races. Hundreds of races. It was incredible to think about it. Where did so many races come from? The human clan came from the ancient mysterious world, and the gods and demons came from the ancient mysterious world. Then what about the giants and beasts? What about the other races that looked like both humans and gods? He had never seen them. Chinzong increasingly felt that the universe was extremely mysterious. It was as if there was a layer of veil covering it, making it impossible for him to see through the mystery. The more it was so, the more Chinzong wanted to lift the veil and see through the mystery. It was a pity that he could not do it at the moment. At least with his current level, it was still not enough. For a moment, Chinzong had an impulse to not leave until he had solved the mystery of the Tower of Babel. However, his rationality restrained his impulse in time. Who knew what the mystery of the Tower of Babel was? Had anyone ever solved it? It was better to find a way to leave this place first. Unfortunately, he did not find a way to leave. Instead, he kept climbing. After resting, Chinzong's physical strength was completely restored. He moved again and continued to search. He did not go far before he saw corpses again, but this time there seemed to be more corpses. The corpses that he had seen before were scattered all over the place. At most, there would only be 2 or 3 corpses. However, there were more than a dozen corpses scattered all over the place, moving forward continuously. Chinzong's expression was a little dignified. After careful observation, he inferred that these experts were killed in battle. Although their corpses were a little decayed, they were not damaged. He could see that the wounds were sword wounds. All of them were sword wounds. In other words, these experts were all killed by a sword. Moreover, Chunzong could infer that they were all killed by the same sword, which meant that they were all killed by the same swordsman. Saint level. These corpses were all saint level experts. As he walked forward, Chunzong saw more corpses lying on the ground. They were in different postures, but their wounds were the same. They were all sword wounds. More than a dozen, more than 20, more than 30. All of them were saint-level experts. There were giants, divine demons, and other races. The remaining aura was very shocking. Chunzong even saw a 15-meter-tall giant, who was at the Great Saint realm. There were also Great Saint realm experts, divine demons, and experts of other races. They were all killed by sword wounds. Chunzong could not help but close his eyes. He made inferences based on the positions and postures of these experts' corpses and the sword wounds on their bodies. Suddenly, a battlefield appeared in his mind. Dozens of pristine Saint Realm and Great Saint Realm experts of different races joined forces to besiege an unknown swordsman. The swordsman fought dozens of experts of different races alone with only one sword. He was not at a disadvantage at all. Wherever the sword light passed, it would penetrate a pristine Saint Realm expert and kill him with one strike. Kill, 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 kill. One expert after another died under the sword of this mysterious swordsman. It was extremely terrifying. Even those Great Saint Realm experts could not resist his sword and were killed one after another. Chunzong opened his eyes. His body trembled involuntarily, and there was extreme horror in the depths of his eyes. What a terrifying swordsman. What a terrifying swordsmanship. He fought dozens of saint-level experts alone with only one sword and even killed all of them. What kind of swordsmanship was this? What kind of strength was this? It was simply terrifying. Just thinking about that kind of swordsmanship made Chunzong shudder. Then, Chunzong saw a figure. It was not a giant beast, not a divine devil, or any other race. It was a human. This human was an old man. His robe was torn and tattered like rags on his body. His long gray hair was messy and looked like dry weeds. His face was thin and full of wrinkles. It was more like dry old bark due to lack of water. If such an old man was placed in a different place, such as on the side of the street or under a bridge, and given a broken bowl and a branch as a crutch, he would look like a beggar. Was he a beggar? Of course not. Even thinking about it would make one shudder in fear. That was right. Chunzong was certain this old man was the powerful swordsman who had killed dozens of saint-level experts from different races. Why was he so sure? It was because of the sword in his hand. The old man stood still on the ground, as if he had taken root on the ground. He held a long sword in his right hand and pointed it diagonally to the ground. There was still an extremely shocking sword power lingering around him. After careful observation, Chunzong was certain that this sword was compatible with the fatal sword wounds on the dozens of saint-level experts from different races. This meant that the dozens of saint-level experts from different races were all killed by this sharp sword. A tyrannical existence who killed dozens of saint-level experts from different races with a sword in his hand. How peerless was he? What level of strength had he reached? It was not just the Great Saint realm. Perhaps he was at the level of the Sword Master, equivalent to the Divine Ancestor realm. However, such supreme existences were now like those corpses. They had returned to eternal silence and stood here. Chapter 30:19. After observing for a while, Chunzong finally confirmed that the old man in tattered robes who looked like a beggar was dead. He was truly dead. A powerful sword practitioner of a generation had fallen here. What a loss it was, and what a pity it was. With a heart full of reverence, Chunzong approached the old man. The body of such a powerful man of the human tribe should be laid to rest in a grave. After digging a hole in the hard ground with the bone sword in his hand, Chunzong approached the body of the sword practitioner, gently lifted it up, and then placed it firmly in the hole. Then, he was about to remove the sharp sword in his hand and put it back when something strange happened. When Chunzong's hand touched the long sword, the sword suddenly trembled and a sword essence burst out in an instant. The sword essence had a kind of lofty and boundless vastness, which gave Chunzong a strange feeling. It was as if a huge true sun was hanging in the sky, unparalleled and supreme. However, after countless years, the power of this sword essence had weakened a lot. But from the remaining power, Chunzong could infer that it was terrifying and amazing in its heyday. With the explosion of the remaining power, the mottled rust on the sharp sword disappeared in an instant. A cold light flashed, shining in all directions, as if the true sun had risen in the sky, shining in all directions. Chunzong immediately let go of the sword in his hand and stepped back to distance himself. His 5 fingers loosened and then tightened, clasping the bone sword tightly. His expression was solemn, and his eyes were extremely sharp. There seemed to be a buzzing sound. Then, as the cold light flashed on the sharp sword, a faint figure appeared. It looked like wisps of smoke that were about to be blown away by the wind, so light and thin. But Chunzong could still see that the faint figure, which looked like smoke that was about to dissipate with the breeze, was the old man's appearance. "How many years has it been?" The shadow of the old man spoke. His voice was very faint, like a dying man who would die at any time. However, Chunzong did not dare to underestimate him at all. He was extremely vigilant and immediately stepped back to keep a distance. Since stepping onto the path of cultivation until now, Chunzong's experiences could be said to be abundant, especially when facing possession. There were always some remnant souls of experts that attempted to possess him, and they almost succeeded. However, they failed in the end because of various reasons. As a result, whenever Chunzong saw the remnant soul of a powerhouse, he would subconsciously become vigilant. He was wary that the other party might try to take over his body. Chunzong admired the strength of this supreme sword cultivator. His swordsmanship was superb, and his swordsmanship was incomparably tyrannical. He fought alone against dozens of saint-level powerhouses from different races, many of whom were in the Great Saint realm. But in the end, he killed all of them. But admiration did not mean that the other party was not dangerous. On the contrary, the spirit of this powerhouse who had lived for an unknown number of years and died many years ago might have a great desire to return to the world. It was almost like an obsession. Immediately, the remnant soul of the old man, which was so faint that it was about to dissipate, seemed to have noticed Chunzong. He was slightly startled, and a pair of vicissitudes of life stared at him, as if he had seen through Chunzong in an instant. Well, a junior of the human clan and a sword cultivator, to be able to come to the heaven-reaching tower, you have some opportunities. What a pity, your path to God has been cut off, but in vain, in vain. The old man's voice was not loud, and it was somewhat intermittent, but Chunzong heard it clearly. The heaven-reaching tower, your path to God has been cut off, but in vain. Chunzong heard it clearly. "Senior, please advise me," Chunzong immediately asked, but he still did not approach the old man. He still kept a sufficient distance, holding the bone sword in his hand, and was ready to strike at any time. "Junior sword cultivator, I see that your essence, chi, and spirit are somewhat familiar. What is the connection between you and Taihao Mountain in the outer universe?" The old man did not answer Chunzong's question, but instead asked a question of his own. Once again, Chunzong was shocked. Taihao Mountain? How did this tyrannical sword cultivator know about Taihao Mountain? Was he also a powerhouse from the outer universe? For a moment, many thoughts flashed through Chunzong's mind. "I am indeed a disciple of Taihao Mountain," Chunzong replied honestly, relying on what he felt in his heart. He was indeed a disciple of Taihao Mountain before he left Taihao Mountain. Of course, now that Chunzong had returned to Taihao Mountain with his cultivation and strength, he would no longer be a disciple, but would be directly promoted to a senior statesman. He would enter the senior statesman hall and hold some power in Taihao Mountain. Ha 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 ha. The old man's remnant soul was stunned at first, but then he laughed. He seemed to be laughing very excitedly, but because of the weakness of his remnant soul, his laughter was somewhat weak. However, Chunzong could still see the joy and excitement he expressed. "How many years has it been? I didn't expect that after leaving Taihao Mountain for so many years, I would still be able to see someone from Taihao Mountain again." The old man's words immediately made Chunzong's eyes widen, and an incomparable shock appeared on his face. Taihao Mountain. This extremely tyrannical sword cultivator was actually related to Taihao Mountain. No, not only was he related, but he was also a member of Taihao Mountain. Suddenly, Chunzong was stunned again, because Chunzong thought of something. With such powerful strength, even stronger than some great Saint Realm experts, a sword cultivator, and an inseparable relationship with Taihao Mountain, his identity seemed to be on the verge of being revealed. Taihao. Only the first 2 generations of Taihao Mountain. Chunzong knew a little about them. Compared to the ancient profound world, they were all great Saint Realm experts, including the current 3rd generation Taihao, who was also a great Saint Realm expert, and the first senior statesman was a pristine Saint Realm expert. After the 1st generation became a great Saint Realm expert, he spent a lot of time and energy to cultivate the 2nd generation Taihao, who inherited the position of Taihao Mountain. After that, he left to explore the mysteries of the universe and went to the core universe. The 2nd generation Taihao did the same. After cultivating the 3rd generation Taihao to inherit his position, he also followed the 1st generation Taihao to explore the mysteries of the universe and finally went to the core universe. Other than the 3rd generation Taihao, Taihao Mountain had never produced a great Saint Realm sword cultivator expert. At most, they were at the pristine Saint Realm. Thus, it could be inferred that this extremely powerful old man was Taihao Mountain's Taihao, but whether he was the 1st generation or the 2nd generation, Chunzong did not know. It did not matter if he did not know, he could just ask. May I ask which generation Taihao Senior is? Chunzong immediately asked with a somewhat respectful tone. Well, I'm the 1st generation Taihao, the remnant soul phantom responded. Junior Chunzong, a disciple of Taihao Mountain, greets the 1st generation Taihao. Chunzong immediately saluted the remnant soul phantom with his sword. While saluting, Chunzong suddenly had a thought. Didn't the 1st generation Taihao go to the core universe? Why would he appear in the Sky Tower? Could it be that the Sky Tower was really related to the core universe? Several questions popped out in succession, and Chunzong was eager to know. The 1st generation Taihao seemed to have entered the Sky Tower a long time ago, so he should know the Sky Tower very well. Next, Chunzong began to ask questions, but the 1st generation Taihao did not say anything. He told Chunzong everything because Chunzong was a member of Taihao Mountain. In the future, he could even inherit the position of Taihao Mountain and take charge of Taihao Mountain. As the 1st generation Taihao continued to reveal information, Chunzong became more and more astonished. Sure enough, the core universe did exist. It was a world of its own. It was a world with great restrictions. Any living being that entered the core universe would be severely suppressed. Under this suppression, although their cultivation would not be reduced, the power they could unleash would be greatly reduced. Compared to the inner universe, they would only have 1/10,000th of the power they could unleash. Originally, a strike from the inner universe could destroy mountains, but in the core universe, at most, it could break a small hill or even a boulder. Then what was the purpose of entering the core universe? To become a god. Only in the core universe could one hope to become a god. How could one become a god? The 1st generation Taihao's explanation was to see the truth. What was the truth? It was hard to explain. The truth of heaven and earth, the truth of the great path, and the truth of the universe. As long as one understood the truth, they could regain control of their powerful strength and even make a breakthrough on their original foundation and embark on the road to becoming a god. However, the truth seemed to be everywhere, but it also seemed to be non-existent. There was no way to understand it. According to the 1st generation Taihao, the truth was divided into 3 levels. Comprehending the 1st level would transform one's strength. Comprehending the 2nd level would complete the transformation and surpass the past to become a demigod. The so-called demigod was a title in the core universe. It referred to those who had surpassed the level of divine ancestor but had not yet reached the level of true god. They only had a little bit of the power of a true god. As for comprehending the 3rd level of the truth, there was a glimmer of hope to become a true god. According to the 1st generation Taihao, only in the core universe could one hope to become a true god. However, it had been many, many years since a great being became a true god. At most, there were demigods and stopped at demigods. Other than comprehending the mystery of the truth on one's own, there was another way to comprehend the truth, and that was to break through the Sky Tower. Comprehending on one's own was to let nature take its course. Breaking through the Sky Tower was to force a breakthrough. There were 100 levels in the Sky Tower. Rumor had it that as long as one could break through the 90th level, one could comprehend the first level of the truth and leave the Sky Tower. If one could break through the 99th level, there was a great chance to comprehend the second level of the truth and become a demigod. If one could break through the 100th level, rumor had it that one could comprehend the third level of the truth and become a true god. That was the saying that one could become a god. However, since ancient times, it seemed that no great being had ever broken through the 100th level. At most, one could reach the 99th level, and it was extremely rare. Entering the Sky Tower would turn into immortal. Turning into immortal meant that one would not be able to use the power of one's cultivation. The only thing one could use was the instincts of one's body. For example, a sword cultivator's superb sword techniques that had already been integrated into one's bones and soul. Whether one was a pristine saint, a great saint, or a divine ancestor, once one entered the core universe, they would turn into a mortal and become an ordinary person. However, they would be different from ordinary people. At least, they would have mastered powerful martial arts that ordinary people did not have. The first generation Taihao had said that the path to becoming a god had been cut off. That was because a long time ago, there had been a great battle between two peerless great beings. It had affected the entire core universe, and, in the end, it had damaged the great path of the core universe, which had affected the Sky Tower. Since then, the power and mystery of the Sky Tower had gradually weakened. Now, it had almost disappeared. Chapter 3020. The first generation Taihao told Qinzong all kinds of information about the Sky Tower and the core universe, which greatly shocked Qinzong. Truth. Demigod. True God. The battle between the peerless powerhouses even affected the great path of the core universe, causing damage to it and the Sky Tower. Qinzong couldn't help but think of the sword mark he saw before entering the tower. It was imprinted on the Sky Tower, as if it would never be erased. Who was it? Who could leave an immortal mark on the Sky Tower with a single sword strike? Qinzong had already learned from the first generation Taihao that the Sky Tower was closely related to the core universe. The Sky Tower itself was said to be indestructible. Even a full power attack from a demigod couldn't damage the Sky Tower at all. In that case, exactly what kind of expert and what kind of strength was able to leave behind an indelible sword mark on the heavenly tower? Qinzong suddenly thought of a figure. It was a figure that seemed clear yet blurry in his mind. It was the original owner of the Heavenly Will Sword, who was also the creator of the Heavenly Will Sword. He was indeed a very powerful swordsman. Even at his current level, he still couldn't figure out how powerful he was. Could it be a true god? For a moment, Qinzong felt that his thoughts seemed to be stuck. He felt like he couldn't move. He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He didn't expect that an invitation from the 10,000 Swords Mountain to enter the unknown place would expose him to such a mystery. But Qinzong was puzzled. Why would the Sky Tower appear in a space-time fragment? There was only one explanation, and that was that he appeared in the past, not the current core universe. The past, present, and future were indescribable existences that surpassed the concept of time. They were also on a level that Qinzong couldn't reach. The first generation Taihao's remnant soul was like a candle in the wind. It could be preserved because of a unique secret technique and the divine sword. But now, it was almost dissipated and only a little bit of consciousness was left. This little bit of consciousness was turned into a gift and given to Qinzong. This bit of consciousness was also incomplete. It did not carry much content, only two types. One of them was the swordsmanship of the first generation Taihao. He had mastered all his swordsmanship and named it the Taihao swordsmanship. It was a superb swordsmanship. At least, Qinzong knew that this Taihao swordsmanship was not inferior to his single-hearted swordsmanship. It even surpassed it. That was indeed the case when one thought about it. The first Taihao was many times older than Qinzong, and his talent was naturally superb. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to cultivate to the great saint realm and kill great saints. His great talent, the accumulation of experience over a long period of time, and so on had created the first Taihao's superb swordsmanship. Moreover, the first Tai Hao was an expert who had comprehended the first true essence through his own abilities. His strength had undergone a transformation. However, he had not been able to comprehend the second true essence after spending a long time. In the end, he chose to challenge the heavenly tower, intending to break through by force. However, it was not easy to challenge the heavenly tower. It was very difficult because he had turned into a mortal and lost all his strength. Although he would not be affected by thirst and hunger, it was still uncomfortable. His physical strength would become limited, and his thinking ability would be greatly affected. Even so, the first Tai Hao reached the 8th floor. He reached the 19th floor, but he had to stop there because of a life-and-death battle with experts from various races. His injuries were too serious. Turning into a mortal in the heavenly tower meant that some secret techniques could not be used. No matter how fast one could not escape. Facing the siege of dozens of experts, even though he had killed all of them, he was also seriously injured and could not climb to the 90th floor. He had to use a special secret technique to seal a strand of his spirit into the divine sword. Now, he had finally completely dissipated. His spirit had completely dispersed, and his body and Tao had disappeared. In addition to the Tai Hao swordsmanship, another gain was a written language. Ancient divine language. This was a language that pointed directly to the great Tao and even the true meaning. Every word seemed very simple, but also seemed very complicated. The profoundness was astonishing. Shenzong expressed that he couldn't understand a single word. Fortunately, he had the memory and experience of the first Tai Hao to follow. Shenzong only needed to spend some time to slowly comprehend it. Although he did not understand it yet, Shenzong could vaguely see that the ancient divine language was somewhat similar to the divine writing of the realm of gods and demons. In other words, the divine writing was somewhat similar to the ancient divine language. The words left by the giants were also somewhat similar to the ancient divine language. Tai Hao swordsmanship, ancient divine language. After a long time, Shenzong exhaled a long breath and buried the first Tai Hao and his divine sword. Although he lacked a sharp sword now, this sword was the first Tai Hao's divine sword. He could not take it away, but buried it with the first Tai Hao. The sword would follow the man if he was alive. After burying the first Tai Hao and his sword, he set up a tombstone and used the bone sword to engrave the first Tai Hao sword doom. After 3 bows, it was a pity that the storage device could not be opened. Otherwise, Shenzong would have taken out a jar of good wine to offer a toast. "Senior, I'll take my leave." Shenzong finally whispered to the sword tomb. Shenzong planned to go to the 90th floor of the Tower of Gods. After all, the first Tai Hao said that climbing to the 90th floor of the Tower of Gods would allow one to comprehend the first true meaning and leave the Tower of Gods. Then, if he set foot on the 90th floor of the Tower of Gods, would he be able to comprehend the so-called true meaning? Shenzong did not know because the first Tai Hao said that the path to God was broken. The Tower of Gods was also damaged, and its power was almost depleted. He did not dare to think about comprehending the true meaning. It would be good if he could leave the Tower of Gods. Anyway, he did gain a lot after entering this space-time fragment. He also learned a lot of mysteries. Any kind of mystery would cause a great commotion if it was revealed. Search. Continuing to search, Shenzong found another spiral staircase and continued to climb. Shrouded in darkness, he moved forward resolutely. Shenzong climbed to the 90th floor. The moment he stepped on the 90th floor, Shenzong inexplicably seemed to have comprehended something, but this feeling of comprehension flashed by in an instant. Shenzong seemed to want to grasp it, but could not. It was a strange feeling. Could it be that this was the so-called true meaning? Unfortunately, it was just a feeling and he did not comprehend anything. However, Shenzong's main purpose was to find the so-called way to leave. After resting and fully recovering his strength, Shenzong walked around the 90th floor. On the 90th floor, Shenzong surprisingly did not see any corpses. It was very empty and desolate. After searching continuously, Shenzong found a spiral staircase that seemed to lead to a higher floor. However, Shenzong did not climb it. Instead, he continued to search for the way to leave the Tower of Gods, or rather, the door. He did not know how much time had passed. He only knew that during this period, Chunzong rested more than 10 times to recover his strength. Finally, he found something that looked like a door. It was a crack, about 2 meters long, but only half a meter wide. It stood erect on the 90th floor of the Tower of Gods and looked very stable. After observing it carefully for a long time and probing it a few times, Chunzong finally determined that this crack should be the door to the Sky Divine Pagoda. Taking a deep breath, Chunzong's expression was resolute. He took a step forward and stepped into the crack. As if time and space were intertwined, countless lights and shadows appeared in front of him. As the lights and shadows intertwined, it was like a long river flowing endlessly. That was history, the history of space-time. However, it flashed past Chunzong's eyes very quickly, and it was difficult to see clearly. When the last scene flashed past, Chunzong only felt that his eyes were bright, and then he saw a familiar scene. It was the unchanging ancient scene of the unknown place. Out? Finally out. Chunzong felt as if a lifetime had passed. His cultivation strength had returned. He could feel and use it at will, but the feeling in the space-time fragment was indeed a very unforgettable experience. Exhaling a long breath, Chunzong collected his thoughts and immediately began to comprehend the first-generation Taihao swordsmanship and the wonderful ancient god language. The ancient god language was really mysterious, as if it explained all the mysteries, especially the ancient god language. Chunzong knew that this would be one of the main directions of his comprehension in the future. The mysteries contained in it were really too profound and wonderful to be described with words. As he comprehended, he waited for the Lightning Sword Saint to come out. Not long after, the Lightning Sword Saint appeared. He looked very tired, as if he had gone through a lot of hardships. What Chunzong didn't know was that when he left the 90th floor of the Sky-Split Divine Tower, a sudden change occurred. Those who had also entered the Sky-Split Divine Tower were all repelled by the remnant power of the Sky-Split Divine Tower, and were directly expelled from the tower. However, the Tower of Heaven was only a space-time fragment, which was equivalent to the past. After leaving the Tower of Heaven, they directly left that space-time fragment and returned to the unknown place. Next, they naturally continued to look for other space-time fragments. Every fragment of space-time had opportunities, more or less strong or weak. However, not long after, everyone felt the fluctuations of the power of the formation of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. It was summoning them back. Chunzong and the Lightning Sword Saint could only look at the space-time fragment in front of them helplessly. They had no choice but to give up. Although it would not take a long time to enter the space-time fragment, what if they missed the opportunity to return? Then they would have to stay in the unknown place forever. Although there were many opportunities here, it was not a good thing to stay in such a desolate place. The two of them did not feel too regretful and did not hesitate at all. In an instant, they immediately turned around and rushed in the direction they sensed. They were extremely fast, and their hearts were set on returning home. Not only did Chunzong and the Lightning Sword Saint do so, but the other sword cultivators who were still alive also did the same. They could only give up on the opportunities that they had not obtained. Chapter 30:21. In the 10,000 Swords Mountain, the number one holy land in the 10,000 Swords ancient realm, the 10,000 Swords realm-shattering array in the middle of the mountain. The cracks on the gray broken sword above the center of the array disc increased, and each crack became more obvious and deeper. It looked like it would shatter at any moment. It can't hold on any longer. The sky-reaching sword saint narrowed his eyes and looked solemn as he stared at the broken sword that was about to shatter completely. Seeing that no one had come out yet, he couldn't help but feel nervous. If they didn't come out and the broken sword shattered, the entrance would be closed. At that time, those sword cultivators would be trapped in the unknown place. It should be known that there were 25 pristine saint stage sword saints and 100 powerful quasi-saints. If they were left in the unknown place, how great of a loss would it be? It would be an immeasurable loss. Finally, a figure appeared and stepped out of the door. The sky-reaching sword saint secretly heaved a sigh of relief. However, it was still not enough. Then, another figure stepped out of the door. A cracking sound was heard. It was very subtle, but very frightening. Everyone looked over and saw that there was another crack on the broken sword. It was an imminent danger. Even the door of the entrance started to fluctuate slightly and became unstable. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. Every breath that followed was filled with fear and trepidation. In the end, the power of the broken sword was completely exhausted. Fortunately, the door of the entrance did not collapse directly because of the broken sword. The 10,000 swords realm-shattering array was barely able to maintain it, but the fluctuations were getting more and more obvious. It felt like it would collapse at any moment. Chunzong and the lightning sword saint stepped out of the door one after another. When they looked back, they couldn't calm down. The door was even more difficult to maintain. However, not all of them came out. At least, the number of people who came out was still less than the number who went in. In the end, the 10,000 swords realm-shattering array was still unable to maintain the door and collapsed. Strong air currents rushed in all directions, stirring up a storm that raged in all directions and swept everything away. Everyone present was silent as they faced the wind and impact of the air currents. Not all of them came out. When they entered, there were 25 sword saints and 100 secondary saints. There were a total of 125 powerful sword cultivators. However, although they hadn't counted the number of sword cultivators who came out now, they were certain that there were less than 100 of them. Shinzong glanced over and sensed their auras. Out of the 25 sword saints, only 22 had come out, and the remaining 3 had yet to come out. Out of the 100 quasi-saints, only 70 or so had come out. The total number was less than 100. Did he not make it out in time, or did he die at the hands of a God-fiend expert? Shinzong was astonished by the appearance of a God-fiend expert in the unknown lands. He also knew that many sword cultivators would die in the hands of God-fiend experts. It was inevitable. After all, he had killed 2 righteous God-fiend experts. However, there were 125 of them when they entered, but less than 100 of them came out. This was a heavy loss. Regardless of the reason, since the broken sword had shattered and the door had collapsed, it meant that the Myriad Swords Mountain would no longer be able to find the unknown lands. They would no longer be able to open up a crack in space-time to travel to the unknown lands and seek fortuitous encounters there. This opportunity was destined to be lost forever. What a pity. However, the loss was great, and it made it difficult for them to feel happy. Shinzong had other questions. What happened in the unknown lands? A God-fiend expert was no small matter. It was a huge matter that had to be taken seriously. Shinzong and a lightning sword saint were not the only ones who had encountered a God-fiend expert in the unknown lands. Sword Saint Chu Yun and many other sword saints had also encountered one and fought with it. The Myriad Swords Mountain attached great importance to this matter. They immediately gathered all the sword cultivators who had encountered a God-fiend expert to understand the matter in detail. They also passed this information to the other 3 holy lands. In short, this matter concerned a God-fiend. It would not be too much to take it seriously. The God-fiend realm was a powerful world that was even older than the ancient mystic world. The structure of the God-fiend realm was also different from the ancient mystic world. The 3 divine ranges were clearly separated, and there were also many divine systems within the 3 divine ranges of different sizes. However, at this moment, the extremely powerful divine masters of the 3 divine ranges were all gathered in one place. It was the center of a secret area in the God-fiend realm, a forbidden area. A round ball about a meter in diameter was slowly rotating. The round ball was emitting a faint light. It was formed by mysterious runes. These mysterious runes looked even more ancient, complex, and mysterious than the God-fiend characters. If Shinzong was here, he would be surprised to find that these runes looked extremely similar to the ancient God language. An indescribably mysterious feeling was brewing in the round ball. The divine masters of the 3 divine ranges all had solemn expressions as they stared at the round ball formed by the ancient God language. As the round ball rotated, it continued to revolve, revealing an indescribable mystery. Suddenly, the round ball paused for a moment. Then, it spread out and turned into chains. They spread out in all directions like silk being peeled from a cocoon. Every single God Lord was enveloped within it, and they were all extremely excited as they sensed the extremely wondrous power. This kind of power had completely surpassed them. It was no longer on the same level as them. The mysterious chains, formed by the ancient god language, continued to spread out. It was like a real dragon dancing in the sky. It looked simple, but it contained an indescribable mystery. The divine masters who stood at the peak of the god-fiend realm were all extremely excited. They were so excited that their bodies were trembling. It's finally cracked. The mystery of the over-god weapon has finally been cracked. We have hope of crossing the ruins of the world. The ancient mystic world will belong to us. Not just the ancient mystic world, the entire universe will belong to us. All the divine masters were extremely excited, and they roared like fanatics. If anyone were to see the divine masters, who stood at the peak of the god and devil world, lose their composure like this, who knew how shocked they would be? It's not the time to be excited. An illusory divine master who seemed to exist between nothingness spoke up. He was not as excited as the other divine masters. Even though his heart was in turmoil, he looked very calm. This was because he was one of the top 3 powerful divine masters in the god-fiend realm. He was a divine master who could control space and time. Only when the space-time gap to the ancient mystic world is opened and the ancient mystic world will become our land of faith. That is the time to cheer. The words of the divine master of time and space calmed the other divine masters down. This was because the words of the divine master of time and space were very authoritative and reasonable. Now, the god-fiend realm had gradually infiltrated the outer universe and developed their faith. The god-worshipping sect was growing stronger and stronger. It had truly affected the distribution of forces in the outer universe. As for the great undead world in the middle layer of the universe, they had yet to enter. This was because the faith of the undead was not easy to develop. Hence, they were still in the planning stage. The ancient mystic world was the most difficult. Previously, they had only had hope of entering the ancient mystic world through the ruins of the world. However, the ancient mystic world was very strong. It was difficult to enter through the ruins of the world. The ancient mystic world was the most difficult world to deal with for the god-fiend realm. At the same time, the ancient mystic world was the world that the god-fiend realm wanted to conquer the most. The ambition of the god-fiend realm was very big. They wanted to unify the universe and bring it under the control of the god-fiend realm. When that time came, they would use the power of the universe to move towards the core universe and become a true god. A true god. When the over-god artifact had evolved to its limit, a tiny bit of its core was revealed. It was an illusory, smoke-like object that seemed to contain a few strands of lightning. It was roughly the size of a fist, and it rippled slightly. Streaks of dark golden lightning flashed incessantly within the smoke. The divine masters all stared at the core of the over-god artifact. Their expressions were very serious because they could feel the power contained within it. It was very shocking. That level of power was something that even they, the divine masters at the peak of the god-fiend realm, could not compare to. The difference was too great. In front of that power, they felt that they were insignificant as a speck of dust. As for this over-god artifact, it had drifted over from the core universe by chance, and they were lucky enough to obtain it. They had spent countless years trying to decipher this over-god artifact, and today they had finally deciphered it. Next, it was time to unleash the power of this over-god artifact. Opening up the space-time crack and connecting to the ancient mystic world, they could cross the ruins of the world and enter the ancient mystic world directly. This way, they would have the hope of truly conquering the ancient mystic world and turning it into a place of faith for the god-fiend realm. They would then harvest more faith and become even stronger. God Lord of space and time, we are ready. God Lord of space and time, let us begin. The group of divine masters said one after another, their voices tinged with excitement. Opening up the space-time crack that led to the ancient mystic world and building a stable space-time door, the god-fiend realm could then enter the ancient mystic world through that door and devour it. Let us begin. The ethereal god lord of space and time said in a serious tone. This operation was extremely important, and they could not afford to fail. Hence, no matter how serious they were, it would not be too much. The god lord of space and time walked step by step towards the core. As he walked, his illusory figure gradually solidified. It was as though he had stepped out from a different space-time. Step by step, illusory smoke filled the air behind him, causing his entire body to look more and more mysterious. There was an incomparably mysterious feeling about him. When he walked up to the core of the Overgod artifact, the God-Lord of space and time's body had completely solidified. It was as though he had turned from an illusory form into something solid. His expression was incomparably serious as he stretched out his hands and approached the core. When they were an inch away, he stopped. Then, an extremely tyrannical power emanated from the God-Lord of space and time's body. It was like the waters of a great river that poured into his arms. Then, it surged through his palms and into the core of the Overgod artifact. Its power was instantly stimulated. Arcs of electricity seemed to be about to explode. The power that burst forth caused the God-Lord of space and the other divine master's expressions to turn even more serious. What a terrifying aura. What a terrifying power. It felt as though it could destroy them. Chapter 30:22. The 10,000 Swords Mountain was the number one holy land in the ancient realm of 10,000 swords. It was also one of the earliest holy lands. The 10,000 transformations sword art, the immaculate universe sword art, the dark light will sword art. The 10,000 transformations sword art was the earliest secret sword art of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. The Immaculate Universe sword art and the Dark Light Will sword art were sword arts created by powerful sword saints later on. After many evolutions and improvements, they were finally as famous as the 10,000 transformation sword art. The 10,000 Swords Mountain had produced many sword saints since ancient times. Each sword saint had his or her own famous sword art, which represented a kind of integration of the way of the sword that he or she had learned. Every sword technique created by a sword saint had its own outstanding points and was extremely superb. However, among so many sword arts, only the 10,000 transformation sword art, the Immaculate Universe sword art, and the Dark Light Will sword art were the most powerful. They were the top sword arts of the 10,000 Swords Mountain, the ancient realm of 10,000 swords, and the ancient profound world. As for the sword arts created by other sword saints, they were still slightly inferior. It was a pity that Qinzong could not see these three supreme, secret sword arts of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. After all, they were secret techniques. The 10,000 Swords Mountain did not want outsiders to see them, which was a pity. However, Qinzong still managed to witness Chu Yun's sword saint's god-slaying 33 styles of ever-changing clouds and mists. Qinzong had learned that from sparring with Chu Yun's sword saint. He was able to comprehend some of its mysteries, and that was enough. After all, Qinzong's goal was not to master his opponent's swordsmanship, but to use his opponent's swordsmanship to seek inspiration and increase his swordsmanship foundation and accumulation. Even though he had seen some of the profundities, Qinzong was still very surprised. Chu Yun's sword saint's ever-changing cloud god 33 styles was indeed unfathomable. At the same time, all the attacks were hidden within and had the power to kill a god. The so-called god-slaying was to directly attack one's divine will and shake one's divine will. If one's divine will was not strong enough, it would be difficult to resist. One would be dazed, stinging, dizzy, and so on. One would be able to seize the opportunity to attack or even kill. Moreover, the clouds formed by the sword light not only had the effect of concealing and confusing, but also had the ability to absorb the impact of external forces, thus providing a certain degree of defense. In other words, the god-slaying 33 forms was a sword technique that could attack, trap, confuse, and defend. Generally speaking, broad meant mediocrity. However, the Chu Yun sword saint had continuously developed this sword technique to a profound level. Not only was it not mediocre, it was even more astonishing. This was Qinzong's evaluation of Yi Futian's swordsmanship. Therefore, he admired Yi Futian very much. If he didn't have the assistance of the Heart Sutra, it was hard to say whether he could have such a sword technique. Next, Qinzong set his sights on the Rhinoceros Sword Saint, ready to experience his Rhinoceros sword technique. The Rhinoceros Sword Saint already knew that Qinzong was not a quasi-sage, but a sword saint. Therefore, he did not reject Qinzong's request to spar with Qinzong. Previously, Qinzong had sparred with the Rhinoceros Sword Saint's second disciple, Jindi, and understood part of the Rhinoceros sword technique's mystery. After that, he had sparred with the Rhinoceros Sword Saint's first disciple, the Wise Sword Master, and had a deeper understanding of the Rhinoceros sword technique. Thus, he was not unfamiliar with sparring with the rhinoceros sword technique now. However, Chunzong also realized that the same rhinoceros sword technique performed by the rhinoceros sword saint and his two disciples were two completely different concepts. The rhinoceros sword technique was extremely fast, and every stroke was straight. It was a perfectly straight stab. Even though one knew that it was a perfectly straight stab and seemed to be traceable, when one truly tried to trace its trajectory, one would discover that it was very difficult. It seemed to have some kind of extraordinary senses that allowed it to directly avoid the interception. What was even more amazing was that once the rhinoceros sword technique was performed, it seemed to be able to directly follow the opponent's flaws and attack. Even if there were no flaws, it would forcefully lead the opponent to create flaws. This was a superb sword technique that had developed the weak to the extreme to defeat the strong. The speed of the sword was extremely fast, and it could follow the opponent's flaws. The technique was also superb. Wasn't this the classic example of the weak defeating the strong? As for the Aurora sword technique, he was very arrogant and did not want to spar with Chunzong at all. Chunzong could not force him either. As for the other sword saints, they left one after another. Chunzong did not have time to consult them one by one. After leaving the 10,000 Swords Mountain, Chunzong comprehended the few sword techniques that he had obtained. He analyzed the mystery in them and integrated them into his single-hearted sword technique one by one. This made the single-hearted sword technique more perfect and more mysterious. In addition, Chunzong was also learning the ancient god language. The more Chunzong learned, the more he felt that the mysteries of the god of Guyu were extraordinary. It was almost endless. Just one character contained many meanings, and what it contained was the mystery of the universe. The more Chunzong learned, the more he felt that the ancient god language was amazing. He also felt that learning the ancient god language would be helpful to his comprehension of sword principle. As a result, Chunzong became more and more immersed in it. This time, Chunzong headed in the direction of the Star Sword Palace. Among the 4 holy lands of sword principle in the 10,000 Swords Mountain, the 10,000 Swords Mountain was ranked first. The Star Sword Palace was one of them. It was difficult to compare with the other 2 holy lands. Only the 10,000 Swords Mountain was recognized as the strongest. Why did he want to go to the Star Sword Palace? This was because the true Void Sage had given Chunzong a name card, telling him that he could go to the Star Sword Palace to look for the Sword Freak. The Sword Freak was his friend. With his name card, it would be easier for Chunzong to comprehend something in the Star Sword Palace. However, Chunzong had been acting according to his plan since he came to the 10,000 Swords ancient realm. It was not until it was about time that he set off for the Star Sword Palace. With Chunzong's speed, it did not take long for him to arrive at the Star Sword Palace. Then, he handed over his name card. The Peerless Sword Saint Chunzong had come to visit the mountain. The Peerless Sword Saint was a sword saint. Even the 10,000 Swords Mountain would not ignore the visit of a sword saint. Naturally, the Star Sword Palace would not. The person who came to greet Chunzong was also a sword saint. Of course, he was a pristine saint. After all, the visitor was a sword saint. If they sent someone below the saint level to greet him, it would seem like they were looking down on him and would easily offend him. Coincidentally, the person who came to greet Chunzong was one of the sword saints who had entered the unknown place with him. Although they were not familiar with each other, at least they had entered the unknown place together. They were more familiar with each other than strangers. What a rare guest. The sword saint smiled. Then, Chunzong entered the Star Sword Palace. Chunzong also told the sword saint his purpose of coming, which was to look for the sword freak. The sword saint was slightly stunned, but he still led Chunzong to the sword freak's cave. The sword freak was not an ordinary sword saint. He was one of the great saint experts in the Star Sword Palace. When they arrived at the sword freak's cave, Chunzong explained his purpose of coming. Then, he took out the name card of the true Void Sage and entered the sword freak's cave. Since you have a name card of the true Void Sage, I'll give you a chance. The sword freak was very straightforward. His appearance was also unique. His gray hair was messy and he looked completely unkempt. He was indeed worthy of the name Sword Freak. Senior, please tell me. Chunzong did not look down on the sword freak because of his strange appearance. On the contrary, he still felt a faint pressure in front of the sword freak. This meant that the sword freak was very strong, much stronger than him. They were not on the same level at all. Help me with one thing, and I'll give you a place to enter the secret place of the Star Sword Palace to comprehend and cultivate. The sword freak said, the Star Secret Place is the most important secret place of the Star Sword Palace. It's extremely hard to get a place to enter. It's also very beneficial for Saint-level experts. If you're not a Saint-level expert of the Star Sword Palace and have not made any contributions, you're not qualified to enter. Senior, what do you need me to do? Chunzong asked. The Star Secret Place was naturally attractive, but it depended on what the price was. The old monster sword wanted Chunzong to do something for him, and that was equivalent to a price. However, Chunzong had to see what kind of thing it was. Chunzong would not agree to everything. Don't worry, it's not a difficult thing. The sword freak said directly, I have a junior who has some talent in sword cultivation, but I haven't been too busy recently, so I don't have time to teach her swordsmanship. It just so happens that I heard that you're on the path of 10,000 swords, so your swordsmanship must be good enough to teach her. How long will it take? Chunzong asked again. After all, there should be a time limit. As for teaching swordsmanship, Chunzong did not mind. The number of swordsmanship he had mastered could be described as thousands. Moreover, if he wanted to, he could easily create some more ordinary swordsmanship. However, relatively ordinary swordsmanship was useless to him, so Chunzong would not create it. It was not necessary. 10 years. The sword freak said after thinking for a while, I'll finish my business in 10 years. At that time, you can bring her to the Star Sword Palace and officially become a disciple of the Star Sword Palace. I'll assess her. If she passes the swordsmanship assessment, the quota I promised you will be given to you immediately. If you weren't recommended by Old Man Jinkong, you wouldn't have such an opportunity, the sword freak added. Chunzong thought for a while and nodded in agreement. The Star Sword Palace was a holy land of swordsmanship. There were many sword saint experts and even more quasi-saint sword cultivators. It was not difficult to find a sword cultivator who was good at teaching to teach the sword freak's junior. Now, he had handed it over to Yi Futian. In other words, he was doing this for the sake of the true void great sage. Chunzong was very grateful for this. Let's go now. After Strange Sword Old Man finished telling Chunzong where his junior was, he immediately asked Chunzong to leave. His temper was also very direct. Chunzong had no choice but to leave. He originally wanted to see the swordsmanship of the Star Sword Palace, but it seemed that he could not do so for the time being. He left the Star Sword Palace and flew toward the place that the sword freak had told him about. It was a city. Fortunately, it was located in the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain, so he did not need to cross the domain. With the speed of Chunzong's sword-raining flight, it did not take him much time to reach the city from the Star Sword Palace. It only took him about 3 days to reach the city because it was located at the edge of the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. First, set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Remember, book guest residence. Chapter 3023. The 10,000 Swords Ancient Domain was vast, and there were many cities. The forces were complicated like the stars in the sky, but they all had one thing in common. Regardless of whether they were big or small forces, or individual cultivators, they all focused on swordsmanship. This was because the aura of swordsmanship in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Domain was rich and prosperous. It would be a waste to not practice swordsmanship. In addition, non-swordsman cultivators were often at a disadvantage in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Domain. Without the geographical advantage, it was inevitable that they would fall behind when fighting with swordsman cultivators. Greensword City was a small city in the 10,000 Swords Ancient Domain. It was also a small city at the border. The vitality here was relatively thin, and the aura of swordsmanship was also relatively thin. This caused the overall strength of the swordsman here to be relatively average. The most powerful swordsman here was only at the heaven level. The Qin clan of Greensword City was considered a relatively powerful force in the city. The granddaughter of the clan master, Qin Mushiwe, was very talented in swordsmanship. Therefore, The Qin clan spent a lot of money to hire a brilliant swordsman to teach her. The Qin clan was considered a big clan in Green Sword City. Naturally, many swordsmen who thought that their swordsmanship was excellent came to hire them. However, Qin Muxue only needed a swordsmanship teacher. Chunzong easily defeated the other swordsman with his absolute swordsmanship and became Qin Muxue's swordsmanship teacher. As for the money, Chunzong did not care. He came here to teach Qin Muxue to fulfill his promise with strange sword old monster. It could also be considered as a trade. The trade would last for 10 years. 10 years was naturally a long time for ordinary people. However, for powerful cultivators, it was nothing. It would pass in a short time. Chunzong also planned to make good use of the 10 years. Apart from guiding Qin Muxue in her swordsmanship cultivation, he would integrate what he had learned to further perfect and improve single-hearted sword principle and learn the ancient god language. He would strive to further perfect single-hearted sword principle to a certain level and master part of the ancient god language within the 10 years. In addition, he wanted to understand the next level of the inner world, which was to evolve the inner world into a universe. There was no doubt that it was very difficult to evolve the inner world into a universe. At least until now, Chunzong had not found any clear clues. However, it didn't matter. The cultivation path that he had opened up was like this. He had to constantly try and work hard to find the correct method and path in order to break through. Otherwise, once he failed, the consequences would be extremely severe. This was also why very few people would attempt to open up a new path of cultivation. It was too difficult, too dangerous, and 1 in a million would fail. Failure would either result in death or being reduced to a cripple, and it was even more miserable than death. Moreover, the current cultivation path was very complete. As long as one cultivated step by step, coupled with talent, resources, opportunities, and so on, there was hope to cultivate to a high level. That was enough. There was no doubt that the Qin clan was related to the strange sword old monster. Judging from the strange sword old monster's age, the Qin clan should belong to a few generations of the younger generation of the strange sword old monster. In fact, there wasn't much of a connection between the Qin clan and the strange sword old monster. If one were to trace the origin of the relationship between the Qin clan and the strange sword old monster, one would have to trace the blood relationship back to many years ago. Chunzong didn't know why Strange Sword Saint would pay attention to this little girl named Qin Muxue, and he didn't bother to get to the bottom of it, because there was no need for that. Anyway, it was equivalent to a transaction, and he just needed to complete the transaction. As for Strange Sword Saint wanting to test Qin Muxue's swordsmanship 10 years later, that was very normal. It was to prevent Chunzong from being perfunctory. Time passed, year after year. Chunzong had been staying in the Qin clan, living in seclusion. He guided Qin Muxue on her swordsmanship while comprehending and cultivating on his own. 9 years ago, when Chunzong came to the Qin clan, Qin Muxue was only a little girl about 10 years old. 9 years had passed, and Qin Muxue, who was already 19 years old, had grown into a slender and elegant young lady. Coupled with the fact that she had been practicing swordsmanship all year round, her tall and straight posture had a kind of vigorous feeling, and she was valiant and formidable. Her superb swordsmanship, beautiful face, and curvaceous figure, coupled with exuberant heroic spirit, made Qin Muxue famous in Green Sword City. She even won the title of Flying Snow Swordsman. Her flying snow swordsmanship was invincible in Green Sword City. No one in the same generation could compare to her. Even many of the older generation couldn't compare to Qin Muxue in terms of swordsmanship. Why? It was because when Chunzong taught Qin Muxue swordsmanship, he didn't teach her any swordsmanship rigidly. Instead, he first taught her the basic swordsmanship and then guided her. He guided Qin Muxue to create a swordsmanship that was most suitable for her based on the basic swordsmanship's characteristics. The so-called semi-creation was naturally related to Chunzong's guidance. The flying snow swordsmanship was the swordsmanship that was most suitable for Qin Muxue. Although it was still very rough in Chunzong's eyes, it had great potential. If Qin Muxue continued to cultivate and improve, the flying snow swordsmanship would become more and more powerful. Only the swordsmanship that was most suitable for oneself could exert its power to the extreme. This was also the reason why Qin Muxue could dominate Green Sword City at the age of 19 with the flying snow swordsmanship. Her cultivation talent was also very good. She also had the heaven rank icy snow bloodline. In addition to Chen Zong's guidance and training, she had already reached the peak of the earth rank at the age of 19. She was only a step away from the heaven rank. It was estimated that she would be able to break through to the heaven rank in 1 or 2 years. In the ancient mystic world, if a cultivator wanted to break through to the heaven rank, they only needed to have a certain amount of talent and hard work. However, there was a difference between early and late. A powerful person might break through after cultivating for 10 or 20 years. An ordinary person might need to cultivate for hundreds of years to break through. To be able to break through to the heaven rank at the age of 20 was considered good in the Holy Land. Outside of the Holy Land, it was extraordinary. Over the years, Qinzong had also taught Qin Muxue with all his heart. He didn't do it half-heartedly. At the same time, he also repeatedly considered his own swordsmanship. Today, Qin Muxue and a few of her friends had an appointment to train in a mountain forest 100 miles away from the Green Sword City. This was very normal. Qinzong wouldn't care, but he also secretly followed to prevent any accidents. After all, when the 10 years were up, he would take Qin Muxue to the Star Sword Palace. After that, she would become a disciple of the Holy Land and cultivate in the Star Sword Palace. Therefore, Qin Muxue couldn't die before going to the Star Sword Palace. As for what would happen after going to the Star Sword Palace, it had nothing to do with him. This dense forest was very vast, covering a radius of thousands of miles. There were many beasts living in it. Some of the powerful beasts had reached the peak of the heaven rank and had amazing strength. However, these beasts usually stayed in the dense forest and rarely went outside. The sword cultivators of the Green Sword City often entered the dense forest to train. This dense forest was also an excellent place to train. Whether it was the earth rank or the heaven rank, they could obtain excellent training here. With Qinzong's strength, no one below the saint rank could detect him. Qin Muxue's performance was still very good. It was remarkable. His 9 years of dedicated guidance and teaching were not in vain. After that, Qinzong frowned slightly. He felt as if something bad was about to happen. In the next moment, waves of roars resounded. One after another, each louder than the last. It seemed extremely violent and chaotic. It was as if a riot was about to break out. Qin Muxue and the others also began to feel that something was wrong. It was because the rumbling sound came from afar, as if there were 10,000 horses galloping. What's going on? One of his companions' face suddenly turned pale. He felt the violent aura spreading over and couldn't help but feel panic in his heart. It seems to be a monster riot. Another companion's voice trembled. What would be the result of encountering a monster riot in such a dense forest? Just thinking about it made people shudder uncontrollably. There was simply no way to escape. Not to mention Earth stage experts like them. Even extreme realm heaven stage experts would most likely die in the face of such a demonic beast riot. Let's go. Qin Muxue's psychological quality was relatively high and tenacious. Although she was a little panicked, she didn't lose her composure because of this. She immediately said and made a prompt decision. No matter what, it was better to leave first. At least there was still a chance of survival. Rumbling sounds continued to ring out, accompanied by violent and chaotic roars. The sounds continued to ring out in the dense forest, followed by the sounds of trees being knocked down. The sounds came wave after wave, becoming denser and denser. It was even more shocking. The ground shook incessantly, and dust billowed into the air. It was like a beacon of smoke that was about to soar into the sky. Qinzong frowned slightly and stared ahead. His sharp sword-like gaze pierced through layers of space obstacles. However, Qinzong didn't go forward to investigate. Instead, he secretly retreated with Qin Muxue and the others to protect Qin Muxue. This was his primary duty. Countless monsters seemed to be driven by something. They roared crazily and rushed out from the depths of the dense forest. They were extremely violent and pushed out of the dense forest. Qin Muxue and the others were very fast, but compared to the violent monsters, they were still a little slow. In the end, they were still caught up. Fight! Facing the violent monsters that were rushing towards them, Qin Muxue took the lead to draw her sword to fight. Her companions gritted their teeth and drew their swords one after another to join the battle. However, compared to the violent sea of demonic beasts, the resistance of these few people seemed so weak and insignificant. A heaven-rank monster rushed over and slapped Qin Muxue with its claws. It was about to kill her directly. There was no way to dodge. Even if Qin Mushue's talent was outstanding, she couldn't dodge under such circumstances. Was she going to die? In an instant, a sword light flashed, and the heaven stage monster beast was sent flying. Its body was also pierced through. The sword light circled around, and all the monster beasts within a few hundred meters were cut in half. Over 100 of them died directly. This scene stunned Qin Muxue and the others, especially the change between life and death. It was a great impact on their minds, and they couldn't react for a while. "Why aren't you leaving?" Shenzong's voice sounded directly into everyone's ears, immediately waking them up. "Go!" Qin Muxue was the first to wake up. A look of surprise flashed across her face, but she didn't think much and immediately left, taking advantage of this opportunity. Finally, they rushed out of the dense forest and fled back to Greensword City. Chapter 3024. A demonic beast riot was not a particularly rare occurrence for those who were relatively close to the demonic beast gathering places. Therefore, the people of Greensword City immediately took action and formed an effective organization to resist the demonic beast riot this time. There are often many reasons for a demonic beast riot. It was difficult to say, and the purpose of the demonic beast riot was not uniform. Some demonic beast riots did not directly attack the human race, but only affected them. For example, the path of their riot happened to be the gathering place of the human race, so they were directly affected. This time it was the same. Greensword City happened to be in the path of the demonic beast riot. Although it was not in the middle, it was still affected. A demonic beast riot was undoubtedly very terrifying. It was not hundreds or thousands of demonic beasts, but at least tens of thousands. There were Earth Stage and Heaven Stage demonic beasts. The demonic beasts were divided into low-level, mid-level, and high-level demonic beasts. The mid-level was equivalent to the human race's Earth Stage, and the high-level was equivalent to the human race's Heaven Stage. Imagine the impact of tens of thousands of low-rank, mid-rank, and high-rank demonic beasts going on a rampage. How spectacular and terrifying would that scene be? It was even more terrifying if there were more than 100,000 demonic beasts. Under such numbers, even an invincible Heaven Stage monster would not be able to withstand it and had no choice but to escape. Otherwise, no matter how many they killed, they would eventually die of exhaustion. The sword cultivators of Greensword City, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, all mobilized and immediately set up layers of defense outside Greensword City. They wanted to resist the battle outside Greensword City. This was the first wave of response. If they really could not hold on, then they would retreat to Greensword City and use the city walls to resist the impact of the demonic beasts. As a member of the Qin family, Qin Muxue had extraordinary strength. Naturally, she could not avoid the battle. Moreover, she had to be on the front line to face the impact of the demonic beasts. Kill. An incomparably intense battle began. This kind of battle was not a drill, but a real life and death battle. It was a cruel and tragic battle where either you die or I die. The demonic beasts would not care about feelings. They would treat cultivators as food. Eating cultivators would be quite beneficial to them. Since that was the case, of course they had to eat. For cultivators, demonic beasts were also beneficial to their cultivation. Their flesh and blood could be made into delicacies that were beneficial to the body. For example, their demonic cores could be refined into medicinal pills. Their fur, scales, bones, horns, claws, and so on could also be made into good materials. The demonic beasts charged forward, and the cultivators defended against them. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. Almost every second, there would be demonic beasts being killed, and there would also be cultivators being killed. Shenzong looked down from the sky. He didn't make a move immediately. Instead, he looked into the distance and frowned. He was deep in thought. Logically speaking, a demonic beast riot was nothing out of the ordinary. However, for some unknown reason, Shenzong's heart was filled with a trace of uneasiness. It seemed that this demonic beast riot was somewhat unusual, and the reason behind it was somewhat shocking. So what was the reason? The uneasiness in his heart drove Shenzong to explore it, but he couldn't just leave it here. In that case, he might as well take action. He lowered his body and landed. Ever since he entered the Sky Tower and couldn't condense the Heavenly Will sword because he had turned into Immortal, Shenzong learned his lesson. He directly manifested the Heavenly Will sword, put it in a scabbard, and hung it at his waist. In this way, if he encountered a situation like the Sky Tower, the awkward situation of having no sword to use would not happen again. Shenzong landed not far from Qin Muxue. The moment his body landed, Sword Qi shot out and directly killed all the demonic beasts around him, clearing a large area. In the next moment, Shenzong pulled out his sword. The sword light suddenly flashed and directly cut in front of him. It was like a line between the sea and the sky. In an instant, it was dozens of meters, then hundreds of meters, until it was 1,000 meters. The sword Qi was like a white line that was 1,000 meters long. It was as fine as silk, but it had an extremely terrifying sharpness. Wherever it passed, no demonic beast could resist. They were as fragile as tofu and were easily cut open as if they were grass. Under the gazes of Qin Muxue and the others, the 1,000-meter-long white sword Qi streaked across, easily tearing the void apart, leaving behind a long and straight sword mark. Groups of demonic beasts fell to the ground one after another. In just an instant, thousands of demonic beasts were killed, and a large area was cleared out. This scene frightened the demonic beasts who were charging in a riot. It was too terrifying. They were not stupid without intelligence, but had a certain level of intelligence. They could tell how terrifying this scene was. For a moment, the rioting demonic beasts stopped, and the sword cultivators were all stunned. What kind of strength was this? One sword. With just one swing of the sword, thousands of demonic beasts were killed. Regardless of whether they were low-level, mid-level, or high-level, none of them could resist at all. The originally extremely cruel battle and killing also stopped in an instant. All eyes fell on Shenzong. It was a kind of shock and admiration, especially Qin Muxue. After being in contact with Shenzong for 9 years, she increasingly felt that Shenzong was mysterious. A mysterious man always had a stronger attraction to excellent women. Qin Muxue was no longer a child. At least that was what she thought. She always had the idea of exploring her swordsmanship mentor. She felt that her swordsmanship mentor should be very powerful, but she had never seen him in action, so she could not judge what level he was at. She did not expect him to be so powerful. With one sword, thousands of demonic beasts were killed. Even heaven-stage demonic beasts could not resist the killing of that sword Qi. What kind of strength was this? He looked so young. Shenzong swung his sword again. The sword Qi broke through the air. This time, it did not kill those demonic beasts. Instead, it slashed across the ground, leaving a very long sword mark. His gaze contained supreme sword power, directly oppressing those demonic beasts. Supreme sword intent also spread out, directly oppressing those demonic beasts. It was extremely tyrannical. Those demonic beasts trembled as if they were struck by lightning. They directly crawled on the ground and whimpered like docile puppies. This scene immediately shocked the sword cultivators of Green Sword City. Those who cross the sword mark will die. Shenzong's voice also sounded. It did not sound strong, but when it fell into the demonic beast's ears, it was like rolling thunder. It directly contained a terrifying power, shaking them to the core. High-level demonic beasts could basically understand human language, and some mid-level demonic beasts could also understand human language. Therefore, they could understand Shenzong's words. In addition to the shock of killing thousands of demonic beasts with one sword and the impact of the supreme sword power, that sword mark also contained a shocking sword intent. Its power was extremely terrifying enough to intimidate those demonic beasts. You go back to the city first. I'll go and see the source of the riot. Chunzong said to Qin Muxue. As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for Qin Mushue's response, he directly flew into the air, turned into a sword light, and flew away. At the same time, Chunzong also quietly left a sword chi on Qin Mushue's body. With such a powerful sword chi, once someone attacked Qin Muxue and Qin Muxue was unable to resist, it would automatically be activated to defend and counterattack. Even a quasi-sage would not be able to kill Qin Muxue. After all, Chunzong was planning to investigate the source of the riot. What was going on? Why did it make her feel uneasy from the bottom of her heart? As for Qin Muxue, to be honest, she had indeed promised Strange Sword Saint, but it was not equivalent to being a nanny. Of course, she could secretly follow and protect Qin Muxue when she had nothing to do, but she could only leave some means of protection at critical moments. If she was still killed, then there was nothing she could do. Just after Chunzong left, the demonic beasts moved again as if they were driven by some force. However, they were very wary of that sword mark and did not pass by it. Instead, they went around it. In this way, they would not directly attack Green Sword City and would not cause any damage to Green Sword City. Even so, the sword cultivators of Green Sword City still gathered and waited for the demonic beasts to suddenly attack. Fortunately, in the end, the demonic beasts were just passing by and did not intend to directly attack Green Sword City. Most people were happy, but a few people felt uneasy. Why did the demonic beasts riot? If it was not to attack Green Sword City, then why did they riot? What was the reason behind it? Would it affect the safety of Green Sword City? To be able to cause so many demonic beasts to riot, it must be something very terrifying. If it affected Green Sword City, the consequences would definitely be more serious than a demonic beast riot. They could only hope that the powerful sword cultivator could find a reason for the riot. Otherwise, Green Sword City might be in danger. Chunzong was extremely fast. In an instant, he was far away from Green Sword City and headed towards the dense forest. The dense forest was vast and had a radius of thousands of miles, but it was nothing to Chunzong. Not long after, Chunzong entered the deepest part of the forest. As soon as he approached the depths of the forest, Chunzong felt a terrifying aura pervading the air. That aura seemed to be shrouded in darkness, with a frantic will and an extremely violent aura, causing Chunzong to unconsciously frown. This aura seemed a little familiar, as if he had felt it somewhere before. In the next moment, Chunzong's expression changed drastically. Divine Demon. He had felt this aura from a divine demon before. Could it be that the divine demon had invaded the ancient sealed world? Unbelievable. Chunzong did not dare to believe this at all. It should be known that although the ancient sealed world and the divine demon world were neighbors, the world barrier between them was very strong. Even a divine ancestor-level master could not do anything about it. Only through the ruins of the world could one enter the other world, but to enter through the ruins of the world, one needed a lot of luck. Moreover, there was a guard, so the probability of entering the ancient sealed world through the ruins of the world was extremely low. But now, Chunzong actually felt the aura of a divine demon here, which made him feel incredulous. Could it be that the divine demon had found a new way to open the space-time portal to the ancient sealed world and invade it? Whether it was true or not, he just needed to get closer to find out. With a heart full of doubts, Chunzong quickly approached and finally saw a pitch-black crack. The crack was about 3 meters high and half a meter wide, constantly emitting faint black smoke. Chapter 3025, 70th Anniversary. May the great motherland become even more prosperous and prosperous. On this beautiful and important occasion, the Six Paths must take this opportunity to ask for a wave of monthly votes. A smoke-like black aura constantly emanated from the pitch-black crack. The darkness was chaotic, violent, and ominous. Chunzong's expression became more and more solemn. It was indeed the aura of the divine demon realm, or rather, the aura of the divine demon realm. Then, was this pitch-black crack leading to the demonic god realm? However, Chunzong did not have the slightest intention of stepping into it. Putting aside whether it led to the divine devil world or somewhere else, with his current strength, going to the divine devil world was not courage, but stupidity. Even a divine ancestor would not dare to step into the divine demon realm alone, let alone himself. Slash. Chunzong directly drew his sword and slashed out an extremely powerful sword light with the power of a sacred swordsman. In an instant, it pierced through the air, traversed hundreds of meters, and slashed towards the pitch-black crack. Without any deviation, the powerful sword light directly hit the pitch-black crack. However, it immediately shattered, and the crack remained intact. Chunzong could not help but frown and attacked again. Sword light instantly pierced through the air, drawing a path. The paths were either straight or curved, and there were a total of 8 paths. They were Sword 1 to Sword 8 of the single-hearted sword technique. Each sword was more powerful than the previous one, and, at the same time, the 8 sword lights directly attacked the pitch-black crack, hitting the same spot. However, the pitch-black crack trembled slightly, and a small crack appeared at the spot where it was hit. Fine cracks spread all over, but as the black aura surged, the cracks healed. Taking a deep breath, Chunzong attacked for the 3rd time. The Sword 1 to Sword 8 of the single-hearted sword technique did not hit the pitch-black crack. Instead, it was pushed forward and then exploded. A true sun suddenly rose from Chunzong's body, and an extremely hot aura spread out. Immediately, it merged into the heavenly wolf sword, completely exploding with a terrifying power. As Chunzong swung the sword, it blasted out. Void explosion. Heaven and earth shook. Taihao's single sword was unleashed with all its might. Compared to 9 years ago, Chunzong's cultivation had not improved at all. The mixed Yuan heart force had not changed either. However, Chunzong had completely absorbed the essence of the first-generation Taihao's swordsmanship. His single heart sword technique had become stronger, and the power of Taihao's single sword had also increased by at least 50%. Taihao's sword was originally extremely powerful, but now that it was increased by 50%, its power would undoubtedly become even more terrifying. The true sun streaked across the sky, its power indescribable. Everything in the surroundings was distorted, the void collapsing. As if it had sensed the danger, the black smoke above the pitch-black crack surged even faster. Like a surging wave, it quickly wrapped around the pitch-black crack, resisting the direct bombardment of the true sun. Not only did the true sun have a terrifying impact, but it also had an incomparably high temperature, incinerating the black smoke in a frenzy. Chunzong stared at it while recovering the almost depleted primordial heart force. In the end, Taihao disappeared, and much of the black smoke had been incinerated, but it was constantly replenished so that the sword could not break it. If it was really connected to the celestial and demon realms, then his attack was equivalent to fighting against the power of the celestial and demon realms. The power of a realm could be said to be endless, and it was not so easy to deal with. A sudden change occurred. An extremely terrifying roar came out from the black smoke. That roar was incomparably violent and carried with it an extreme darkness, causing Chunzong to involuntarily feel oppressed. In fact, Chunzong preferred to call the celestial and demon realms the demon realms. The so-called celestial and demon realms were more like demons, at least for cultivators who were not from the celestial and demon realms. In the next moment, a figure suddenly rushed out of the pitch-black crack, rushed out of the black smoke, and directly pounced on Chunzong. Its speed was extremely fast, like a dark lightning bolt. It was a beast, a strong and slender beast with a pitch-black body. It looked a bit like a cheetah, but with bone spurs, it looked more ferocious. This was a magical beast from the celestial and demon realms, and it was extremely ferocious. This magical beast pounced, opening its stinky mouth, revealing fangs that flickered with cold light and directly biting Chunzong's neck. Its sharp claws also flickered with an extremely dazzling cold light and directly pierced toward Chunzong's chest. Its tyrannical aura was directly at the level of the heaven realm. Chunzong knew that the creatures in the celestial and demon realms were naturally tyrannical, and it was normal for them to be at the level of the heaven realm. After all, the celestial and demon realms were superior to the mysterious ancient world as a whole. In the celestial and demon realms, the demigod realm was nothing. Only when one reached the level of a true god could one be considered a true powerhouse. The attack of the Heaven Realm magical beast naturally did not pose the slightest threat to Chunzong. With a flash of sword light, the magical beast was directly killed by Chunzong, but then more magical beasts rushed out. However, every time a magical beast appeared, it was immediately killed by Chunzong. When the next magical beast appeared, the sword light flashed again, and it was killed again. These magical beasts were only at the level of the Heaven Realm. To Chunzong, they were like ants. Even if there were 1,000 or 10,000 of them, they would not be able to stop Chunzong from killing them. Of course, this was not a situation where thousands or tens of thousands of magical beasts appeared. Otherwise, even a saint-level powerhouse would not be able to kill them all so easily. Killing magical beasts one after another, Chunzong consumed very little of his mixed yuan heart force and would immediately come over. In other words, under this rhythm, Chunzong could endlessly attack and kill without limit. Hundreds of magical beasts at the level of the Heaven Realm died in a row, and no more magical beasts appeared. The pitch-black crack unknowingly expanded by 1 meter, and its width increased again, becoming a crack that was 4 meters high and 1 meter wide. More black smoke surged out from it, constantly spreading to the surroundings. Chunzong also found that the surrounding environment was unknowingly changing. Chunzong did not know what that kind of power was, but it had a very strong, aggressive nature. It would corrode everything around it and then assimilate it. It was a very terrifying power. At this time, the best thing to do was to spread the news and inform other powerhouses. Unfortunately, the distance was too far. Chunzong did not have any good way to inform other saint-level powerhouses in the distance. He was also worried that if he left, more magical beasts would appear and cause terrible damage. As his thoughts turned, no more magical beasts appeared. Chunzong made a prompt decision and immediately burst out with extreme speed, heading in the direction of Qingjian City. Soon, Chunzong arrived at the Green Sword City and found the Green Sword City Lord. "I am Peerless Sword Saint Chunzong." Chunzong directly stated his identity. The two words Sword Saint startled the city lord at first. After all, Qingjian City was only a small success at the border. Quasi-saint sword cultivators were very rare, let alone a sword saint. But under Chunzong's supreme sword power, the city lord immediately came to his senses and immediately bowed in trepidation, looking indescribably excited. "The situation is urgent. A strong enemy from another world has invaded. Contact the 4 great holy lands as soon as possible. If you can't reach them, then contact the person with the highest status you can reach. Explain the situation and let him contact the 4 great holy lands or any saint-level powerhouse as soon as possible." Chunzong said seriously. His tone was solemn, and the city lord's expression was also solemn. He was infected by the atmosphere. Yes, the city lord immediately agreed. "Remember, this is extremely important. There must be no delay." Chunzong's tone became more and more serious. "Otherwise, if I find out who delayed, I will kill without mercy." The last 3 words directly made the city lord tremble all over. "Rest assured, Sword Saint, I will immediately contact the city lord of Mountain Sword City." The city lord quickly responded. Mountain Sword City was a much stronger city than Qingjian City. The city lord's strength was naturally much stronger than the city lord's. Unfortunately, he forgot to leave the contact information of the Thunder Sword Saint and the others. No, he had another way, which was to go to Taishan. It had been a long time since he left Taishan, and Chunzong didn't go to the Taishan realm again. A long time had passed, and with the various experiences in the unknown place, he felt that time and space were in disorder, and he had unconsciously forgotten some things. For example, the Taishan token. Chunzong had never used the power of the Taishan token to go to and from the Taishan realm, so he had forgotten. Now that he had told the city lord about it, he suddenly remembered. Since he remembered, he couldn't have the slightest hesitation. Making a prompt decision, Chunzong immediately left the city lord's residence. He found a deserted place and took out the Taishan token to activate it. In an instant, the Taishan token emitted a ray of light, projecting forward and building a portal that connected to the Taishan realm. Through this portal, one could directly return to Taishan. However, it couldn't be used in a fierce battle, because it took some time to build this portal. Although it wasn't very long, less than 10 breaths, for a fast-changing battle, 10 breaths was enough for a lot of changes to happen. Many victories and deaths in battles were completed in just a few breaths. Therefore, the portal to Taishan was only suitable to be used when there was no battle or when the battle wasn't critical. When the portal was completed, Chunzong immediately stepped into it. It was as if he was shuttling through invisible water. When he took another step, he appeared in Taishan. Unfortunately, the true Void Grand Sage wasn't in Taishan. Chunzong could only find other saint-level cultivators. In the end, he found a supreme saint, the Nine Flame Supreme Sage. Chunzong didn't beat around the bush and directly told him what he had found. Let's go. The Nine Flame Supreme Sage's expression was solemn. He immediately moved, without hesitation, and left Taishan through the portal. He went to Qingjian City, and then, together with Chunzong, he quickly rushed into the dense forest, heading straight for the depths. Fast. The Nine Flame Supreme Sage's speed was extremely fast. Even if Chunzong exploded with his full speed, he couldn't catch up. Therefore, the Nine Flame Supreme Sage was the first to reach the depths of the dense forest. When Chunzong arrived, he saw balls of blazing flames exploding, burning in all directions, and directly covering the pitch-black crack. The power of the flame was extremely terrifying. It burned the void until it was distorted. Chunzong could feel the terrifying power contained in it from afar. He was worthy of being a powerhouse of the Great Sage Realm. His first move was so astonishing. It seemed that nothing could resist the burning of this flame, and everything would be turned into ashes. Through the blazing flames, Chunzong saw the black smoke being incinerated into nothingness. He also saw the pitch-black crack expanding further. Chapter 3026. Part 1. I came late. I celebrated the 70th anniversary of my country last night. I was so happy that my head hurts. Shangjian City was not a small city. It was much bigger and more prosperous than Greensword City. Furthermore, the mayor of Shangjian City was a heaven-rank final extremity master. What invasion from another world? What a joke. After the mayor of Shangjian City received the urgent message from the mayor of Greensword City, his first reaction was to be stunned. Then he laughed coldly. Sir, are we not going to report this? The beauty beside him asked. Report what? The mayor of Greensword City is old and weak. He must have misunderstood something. The mayor of Shangjian City said indifferently. His rough hands kneaded the beauty's breasts. Don't worry about him. I've lived for so many years, and I've never heard of another world. Come on, beauty. Let's have some fun. Annoying. In the depths of the forest, the Nine Flame Supreme Sage waved his hand. Blazing flames incinerated everything. Even the void was incinerated. All the dust particles were burned to ashes. Such power was terrifying. Chunzong could not even get close. The difference in power was too great. However, under such terrifying flames, the black crack did not disappear. Instead, it was filled with a mysterious power. It resisted the burning of the flames and continued to expand. Now, the black crack was 10 meters long and 3 meters wide. It was like a tall black door. The aura it emitted was even more shocking. Immediately, a figure appeared. The moment it appeared, it emitted a terrifying aura. It swept in all directions. The aura was so strong that it was not inferior to the Nine Flame Supreme Sage. Chunzong squinted his eyes. His expression changed. He immediately saw that it was a divine demon master. A divine demon master in the spiritual god level. It was indeed the divine demon realm that wanted to invade the mysterious ancient world. Although he did not know why, the demonic beasts appeared first. After discovering that the demonic beasts were killed, they stopped and sent a divine demon master. The appearance of a spiritual god expert was called the Nine Flame Supreme Sage. His expression was extremely grave. The flames that filled the sky immediately condensed and rushed towards the spiritual god expert, like rivers returning to the sea. They carried extremely terrifying power as they bombarded the spiritual god expert. That spiritual god, divine demon expert immediately erupted as well. A layer of black light permeated the air and completely covered his surroundings. That layer of black light looked like a crystal with tens of thousands of sides. It was filled with extremely tyrannical defensive power that could resist all attacks. Even though the Nine Flames Grand Sage's flames were shockingly powerful and could burn through the void, he was unable to break through it. Leave quickly and inform the four Holy Lands. The Nine Flames Grand Sage whispered to Qinzong, I will stop him. Qinzong also knew that if it was a principal god, he would still be able to attack and even kill him. However, a spirit god fiend expert was too powerful. He was completely no match for him. He probably wouldn't even be able to withstand a single strike. The best thing for him to do was to leave and inform the four Holy Lands immediately. As for letting the Master of Greensword City send a message, that was also a method that didn't conflict. Furthermore, it was still unknown when the four Holy Lands would be notified. Previously, it was only because he was here. Now that the Nine Flames Supreme Sage was here, there was nothing for him to do for the time being. Without hesitation, Qinzong immediately left. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. If he had remembered the Taishian token in time, perhaps he wouldn't be in such a passive situation. Of course, that wasn't necessarily the case. After all, this pitch-black crack was very strong. Even the Nine Flame Supreme Sage couldn't destroy it. This meant that even if he had remembered the Taishian token and the Nine Flame Supreme Sage came, he still wouldn't be able to destroy this space-time portal. As the portal continued to expand, what was supposed to happen would happen. All in all, guilt and whatnot didn't matter. The celestial and demonic world was about to invade. The experts of the ancient mysterious world had to unite and resist the invasion of the celestial and demonic world. Qinzong's explosive speed was extremely fast. Without any pause, he flew directly towards one of the four Holy Lands. One of the four Holy Lands closest to him was the Valley of No Return. There was only one secret sword technique in the Valley of No Return, and it was called the Sword Technique of No Return. Qinzong hadn't seen the wonders of the Sword Technique of No Return, but he had heard that it was an extremely terrifying sword technique. The Sword Technique of No Return, once the sword was drawn, there would be no return. The so-called no return meant that there would be no return until there was blood. It was an extremely murderous sword technique. When the sword was drawn, there must be blood. Without blood, it would not return to the sheath. It was extremely extreme. Qinzong was actually very interested in such a sword technique, but now wasn't a good time. Qinzong's speed was extremely fast as he flew towards the Valley of No Return. On the other hand, the Nine Flame Supreme Sage and the Divine Demon in the spiritual god realm were locked in an intense battle. The Nine Flames Great Way of the Nine Flame Supreme Sage was an extremely violent Great Way. Its frontal attack power was extremely tyrannical and shocking. However, such shocking power was unable to break through the Divine Demon in the spiritual god realm. Too strong. The defensive power of this Divine Devil expert is too tyrannical. It's like a tortoise's shell. It's simply difficult to break through. Even if it's broken, it'll recover very quickly. This was also the strategy of the Celestial Demon Realm. First, they let the Divine Demon experts who were good at defense enter the mysterious ancient world. This way, they could better resist the experts of the mysterious ancient world and buy time for the other Divine Demon experts to enter the mysterious ancient world. The Divine Demon in the spiritual god realm was standing in front of the space-time portal, resisting the violent attacks of the Nine Flame Supreme Sage. The Valley of No Return was a valley, an extremely huge valley. Outside the valley was an invisible formation. It was a sword technique formation. If this formation was activated, it could resist the attack of a Great Saint Realm expert. It could even resist the attack of a Divine Ancestor Realm expert to a certain extent. Of course, that was under the condition that it was fully activated. The amount of energy consumed in every breath was shocking and massive. Even in a half-activated state, it was enough to resist the attack of a pristine Saint Realm expert. Qinzong did not barge in rashly. Instead, he stood outside the Valley of No Return. Peerless Sword Saint, Qinzong, is here to visit. I have something important to tell you. Qinzong said loudly. His voice was like the sound of a sword, but it was also like rolling thunder that directly entered the Valley of No Return. Immediately, a sword light soared into the sky and approached Qinzong with an indomitable sword will. It was a sword saint in the Valley of No Return, a pristine Saint Realm Sword Saint. Greetings, peerless Sword Saint. The other party saluted with his sword. Please. Chunzong realized that this person was also one of the Sword Saints who entered the unknown place in the 10,000 Swords Mountain with him. I have something important to discuss with the Valley Master. The situation was urgent. Chunzong returned the salute and said immediately without any formalities. You want to see the Valley Master? The Sword Saint frowned slightly. The Valley Master of the Valley of No Return was a great Saint Realm expert. After all, the Valley of No Return was a holy land. It was not like other forces that let a quasi-saint be the sect master. The Valley Master of the Great Saint Realm was not someone who could be easily met. However, Chunzong's expression was solemn and his tone was dignified. It was obvious that there was something very important. I'll report it now, the Sword Saint said immediately. Soon, the Valley of No Return replied. Chunzong immediately went to see the Valley Master. The Valley Master of the Valley of No Return was an old man who looked thin. There did not seem to be any powerful aura on him. However, Chunzong was able to capture the weak aura that flashed across the other party's body. Although it seemed very weak, it was a very terrifying feeling. When Chunzong sensed it carefully, he could not help but feel his hair stand on end. This was especially true for the old man's eyes. They looked ordinary, but they were filled with restrained brilliance, which was extremely shocking. Little friend, I heard that you are looking for me for something important. The Valley Master of the Valley of No Return smiled. With his status, strength, and age, it was very appropriate for him to call Chunzong little friend. Valley Master, the divine demon world has invaded. Chunzong's words made the Valley Master of the Valley of No Return's expression change drastically. As one of the Holy Land Masters and a great Saint Realm expert, he naturally knew about the existence of Tai Xian. At the same time, he also knew the true purpose of Tai Xian's existence. The divine demon world. It was also a powerful world that all Sage Realm experts knew about. The divine demons of the divine demon world were also very powerful. Any cultivator who had entered the ruins of world and fought with divine demon experts knew this. Coincidentally, the Valley Master of the Valley of No Return had also entered the ruins of world and fought with divine demon experts before. At this moment, when he heard that the divine demon world had invaded, his expression changed immediately. Have the divine demons rushed out of the ruins of world? The Valley Master of the Valley of No Return asked immediately. After all, the ruins of world was the only place that connected the divine demon world and the ancient mysterious world. The only way for divine demon experts to invade the ancient mysterious world should be through the ruins of world. Could it be that the divine demons found a way to invade the Tai Xian realm through the ruins of world and then the ancient mysterious world? If that was the case, wouldn't the Tai Xian realm have fallen? It shouldn't be so fast. With the power of the Tai Xian realm, there should be at least one great Saint Realm expert and many small saints guarding it. Even if it was invaded by the divine demon world, it shouldn't have fallen before the news could spread. It's not the ruins of world. It's in the depths of a dense forest 100 miles away from Greensword City. The divine demon world used some method to open a space-time crack and build a space-time portal. When I came to the Valley of No Return, the Nine-Flame Supreme Sage of the Tai Xian realm was already fighting with a spiritual god expert. Chunzong immediately summarized the situation he knew. When the Valley Master of the Valley of No Return heard this, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but stand up with a solemn expression. I understand. I'll leave now. The Valley Master of the Valley of No Return said. He quickly gathered the Sword Saints of the Valley of No Return and explained the situation. The invasion of the divine demon world. This was no small matter. They had to treat it seriously. Even if they could wipe out the space-time crack, they still had to take it seriously. At the same time, in the depths of the dense forest 100 miles outside of Qingjian City, the Nine Flames Grand Sage continued his relentless attacks. However, he was still unable to truly break through the defenses of the spiritual god-level God Fiend Master. Instead, the space-time fissure expanded even further. It was now 20 meters long and 10 meters wide. It looked like a huge black door that constantly spewed out astonishing God Fiend aura. In an instant, a terrifying aura rushed out from the space-time crack, causing the Nine Flames Supreme Sage's expression to become even more solemn. "Welcome, Divine Lord." The spiritual god expert immediately retreated and spoke. The content of his words caused the Nine Flames Supreme Sage to be extremely shocked. Chapter 30:27. Divine Master. The Divine Master from the celestial and demonic world had arrived. The Nine Flames Grand Sage was shocked beyond belief. He also felt an inexplicable sense of fear. A Divine Master was equivalent to a Divine Ancestor. No, some Divine Masters were even more powerful than a Divine Ancestor. They were extremely terrifying existences. Retreat? He could not retreat. After a moment of internal struggle, the Nine Flames Grand Sage made a decision. No matter what, he could not retreat. Once he retreated, no one would be able to stop the arrival of the celestial and demonic world cultivators. When that happened, the invasion of the celestial and demonic world cultivators would be disastrous. He could not retreat. He could not retreat, even if he had to pay the price with his life. He had to hold on until the other ancient Xian world cultivators arrived. Attack, attack with all his might. It would be best if he could defeat the Divine Master before he arrived. As for killing him, the Nine Flames Grand Sage did not dare to think about it. The gap between a great saint and a Divine Master was huge. It was like a small saint facing a great saint. However, the Nine Flames Grand Sage's all-out attack could not do anything. The terrifying aura grew stronger and stronger. Gradually, a figure appeared. It was a figure that was a few meters tall. As soon as it appeared, it seemed to expand infinitely. It was like a giant that supported the heavens, a giant that was a few hundred meters tall or a few thousand meters tall. However, the Divine Master's body was not that huge. It was just an illusion in terms of aura, an influence in terms of aura. Pressure. The Nine Flames Grand Sage felt extremely pressured, so much so that he could not breathe. He had no choice but to attack again. Burn. A look of determination appeared on the Nine Flames Grand Sage's face. It was a kind of determination, a kind of desperation to survive. Facing a Divine Master, even though he did not know which Divine Master it was at least at the Divine Ancestor level. It was terrifying. Under normal circumstances, he would not be a match for it. As such, he could only burn himself. Yes, the Nine Flames Grand Sage's entire body was burning. He was burning furiously, as if oil had been added to a fire. Once he started burning, he became incomparably hot and violent. He was extremely violent and scorching. A frighteningly hot aura surged out and covered all directions. It was as if nothing in the heavens or the earth could resist it. Die! The Nine Flames Grand Sage, who was burning to the limit, roared. In an instant, he unleashed a fire dragon. The fire dragon was hundreds of meters long. As soon as it appeared, it roared. The fire dragon's roar was earth-shattering. The fire dragon's body was red, but it instantly turned orange, then yellow, then red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, purple, silver, and finally gold. Great Tao of Nine Flames. Every color represented a different level of power. It was a terrifying power. When it turned into golden flames, its power reached its peak. Even the flames around the Nine Flames Grand Sage turned golden. The golden flaming dragon roared crazily and charged at the Divine Master who had just appeared. This was the Nine Flames Supreme Sage's all-out attack. It was also the Nine Flames Supreme Sage sacrificing his own life in exchange for an attack that exceeded his limits. The power of this attack surpassed his previous attacks and approached the level of a Divine Ancestor. Even a Divine Ancestor could not underestimate this attack. The Divine Master was indeed very strong. However, in the face of the attack from the fire dragon, his expression changed. With a roar, he raised the black rod in his hand and smashed it out. With a boom, the void seemed to be shattered. The terrifying rod smashed out. It seemed to be thousands of meters long. It smashed down directly towards the fire dragon. After a slight pause, the fire dragon exploded. Countless golden flames sputtered and burned through the void. After they landed in the distance, the trees were reduced to nothingness. The ground also evaporated, forming many craters. This scene was extremely shocking. The Nine Flame Supreme Sage's expression became more and more serious. He did not expect that, even after burning himself, such an attack that exceeded his limits could not harm the Divine Master at all. It seemed like this time, he could only give it his all. This wasn't just a casual fight. It was a real fight that required one to pay the price of one's life. Life was precious, especially for an expert like him who had cultivated to the great sage realm. He had a lofty status, and his lifespan was also very long. It was not difficult for him to live for hundreds of thousands of years or even hundreds of thousands of years. However, he had only lived for tens of thousands of years now. There was still a long way to go. But now, he was about to lose everything. Forget it. Wasn't the purpose of joining the Tai Xian sect to resist the invasion of the celestial and demonic world? There would always be such a day. The only difference was that it would happen a few tens of thousands of years earlier or later. With a boom, the 9-flame Supreme Sage completely exploded. In an instant, flames of 9 different colors covered the sky and earth. They appeared out of nowhere. Each flower was a few meters long. They floated around one after another. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, purple, silver, gold. 9 colored flames bloomed in the void like flowers. They were incomparably magnificent. Each flower of flames emitted an extremely shocking aura. Some were extremely hot, some were extremely blazing, some were extremely violent, and some were extremely quiet and mysterious. 9 flames. Great heavenly explosion. The voice of the 9-flame Supreme Sage rang out. His words contained an extremely frightening power. His eyes seemed to be burning. Flames of different colors appeared from all directions. They flew towards the Divine Master with a black stick. Each flame carried an extremely frightening power. Boom, boom, boom. The Divine Master waved his black stick and shattered the flames. After the explosions, the flames turned into sparks and fell to the ground. In a few breaths' time, dozens of flames of different colors were shattered. They turned into sparks and fell to the ground. The 9-flame Supreme Sage's entire body was burning. His body also turned into flames. He completely turned into flames, the flames of 9 different colors. His entire body disappeared, merging the body with the way. His entire being, his essence, spirit, soul, and even his body were all set ablaze, fusing into the great way of 9 flames that he had grasped. Only his mind remained, but without his body and soul to rely on, his mind would quickly dissipate. With a boom, the 9-flame Supreme Sage turned into a 9-colored flame and charged towards the Divine Master at an astonishing speed. He was instantly shattered by the Divine Master's stick. The sprinkling 9-colored flames seemed to have fused with the ground, and a sudden change occurred. With the Divine Master as the center, even the spirit god Godfiend expert was completely engulfed. Wisps of flames of various colors spread across the ground, as if someone was holding a brush and painting with the ground as a canvas. The patterns and lines of flames directly drew the outline of a flower that suddenly soared into the sky. It was a huge, 9-colored flaming flower. In an instant, it wrapped the Divine Lord and that Divine Devil expert at the spiritual god level. It looked like a flower bud. However, because the power was too tyrannical at that moment, even the Divine Lord couldn't break it open. He could only be wrapped inside it. An extremely frightening power burst forth from the 9-colored flame flower. It was like a scorching furnace. It burned wildly and burned everything. It wanted to burn everything into ashes. Burn, burn, burn. Not only was it burning at an extremely high temperature, but it was also filled with shocking explosive power. As it exploded, it madly attacked the Divine Master and the Divine Demon in the spiritual god level. The Divine Lord's expression was extremely solemn. As his black staff trembled, his tyrannical power completely erupted. In an instant, the black staff constantly expanded in an attempt to break through the 9 flames flower's encirclement. At the same time, the Divine Lord also constantly erupted with power in an attempt to break through. However, this 9 flames flower was the 9-flame Supreme Sage's final work. It was the final song of his life and his great way. After this attack, he would die. Even a divine ancestor-level expert would not be able to resist it easily. With a boom, the 9 flames flower was finally broken open by the Divine Master. After breaking open the 9 flames flower, the Divine Master panted heavily. His aura was chaotic. It was obvious that he was also injured. As for the Divine Demon in the spiritual god level, his situation was even worse. His body was constantly burning with flames. It was as if oil had been poured on his body. No matter how much power he released, he could not extinguish the flames on his body. The Divine Master also immediately attacked. He released his power and struck with his stick. He wanted to extinguish the 9-colored flame on his opponent's body. However, it was difficult to do so. After all, the Divine Master was also injured. Under the 9-Flame Supreme Sage's final song, he paid the price of his life to injure a Divine Master. He also burned a divine demon in the spiritual god level to death and turned him into charcoal. The moment the 9-Flame Supreme Sage's strand of consciousness completely dissipated, the heavens and the earth shook. Between the heavens and the earth, 2 rays of sword light were extremely fast. The sword light was bright and seemed to carry a trace of blood. It directly traversed the sky. Its speed was indescribably fast. These 2 rays of sword light were the manifestation of the Valley Master of the Valley of No Return and a great Saint Sword Cultivator of the Valley of No Return. They were rushing with extreme speed in the direction of Qingjian City. Suddenly, as the heavens and the earth trembled, gusts of wind blew. The wind whimpered as if countless people were crying. It was filled with sadness. As the sorrowful wind swept past, a smear of crimson appeared in the sky. It was crimson like blood. The crimson turned into wisps of clouds and condensed in the sorrowful wind's whimpered. Then, drops of red dripped down. The sorrowful wind, blood rain, the heavens and the earth wept, and the great Tao wailed. Such a sorrowful vision caused the expressions of the Valley Master and the other 2 great Saint Realm powerhouses to change drastically. They couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow growing from the depths of their hearts, causing them to choke with grief. Dead. A saint has fallen. Who has fallen? A saint has fallen. Its full name was the Fall of a Saint. Saint-level cultivators mastered the Great Way. This Great Way was controlled by themselves. However, it was closely related to the Great Way origin between the heavens and the earth. Therefore, when a saint-level cultivator fell, it would cause the Great Way of the heavens and the earth to tremble. A strange phenomenon would appear, as if the heavens and the earth were mourning. It was called the Fall of a Saint. When a small saint fell, the fall of a saint was not intense. It only affected a small area. However, when a great saint fell, the area of the fall would be much larger. Chapter 30:28. Sorrowful winds howled and blood rained down. Heaven and earth mourned. This was the death of a saint. Shenzong, who was flying through the air on his sword, could not help but pause. He could not help but feel a burst of sadness from the depths of his heart. It was like a torrent that broke through a dam. It was so unexpected that it engulfed his entire being. The 9-Flame Supreme Sage. Shenzong could not help but be speechless. An indescribable sadness surged from the depths of his heart. Following that, an incomparably deep murderous intent erupted like a volcano. The one who died should be the 9-Flame Supreme Sage. Otherwise, how could a great saint die so easily? It must have something to do with the Fiend God realm. If the one who died was really the 9-Flame Supreme Sage, then it had something to do with him. If he had not gone to Taixien to find a 9-Flame Supreme Sage, the 9-Flame Supreme Sage would not have died. Of course, if he had found another Supreme Sage, such as the True Void Sage, then the one who died might be the True Void Sage, or not. All in all, it was just a guess. But the truth had already happened. Beneath the indescribable sorrow, there was a deep sense of guilt. Although the fall of the 9-Flame Supreme Sage was caused by the circumstances, it had nothing to do with him. After all, he was the one who found him and caused his fall. Burn. A ball of anger burned in his heart, filled with endless murderous intent and anger. Shenzong's eyes were piercingly cold. As the qi around him changed, it was filled with an incomparably shocking murderous intent. It was a murderous intent towards the Fiend God realm. Without a doubt, the fall of the 9-Flame Supreme Sage was inextricably linked to the Fiend God realm. He was even directly killed by a Fiend God realm master. But was it just because of a spiritual God realm master? Not necessarily. A Fiend God realm master might be stronger than a human cultivator of the same level, but it was not absolute. It was not easy to kill them. Divine Master. Shenzong could not help but think that the Divine Master of the Fiend God realm had descended upon the mysterious ancient world. Only a Divine Master had the power to kill a great saint. But it was not that easy, unless it was an extremely powerful Divine Master. It was highly likely that the Nine Flames Grand Sage died because he fought to the death against the Divine Master. Otherwise, if he had retreated, there was an 80 to 90% chance that he would not have died. Heavy. Thinking of this, Qinzong's heart became heavier and heavier. It was so heavy that he found it hard to breathe. The anger and killing intent in his heart made Qinzong want to rush towards Green Sword City and kill the God Fiends. However, his rationality stopped him from doing so. Even if he rushed over with his own strength, it wouldn't be of much use. He wouldn't be able to fight against a spiritual God-level God Fiend expert, let alone a Divine Master-level God Fiend expert. Now, it was time to contact the other saints. The invasion of the God and Devil world was not a matter of one person, but of the entire ancient profound world. No one could stay out of it. Of course, ordinary cultivators were powerless in front of the Fiend God realm. The power of the Fiend God realm was not something they could imagine. The only ones who truly had the qualifications to cross sages were the quasi-sages. As for those ultimate heaven stage experts, they were also useful. They were specially used to deal with those ultimate heaven stage magical beasts in the godly demon world. For the entire ancient profound world, there were only a few who could really be used to resist the God and Devil realms. Only the saints were the true main force against the God and Devil realms. Of course, Qinzong didn't know if the God and Devil realms would eventually invade. However, since it was the God and Devil realms, it wouldn't be too much to pay attention to it. Moreover, now that a great saint expert had fallen, it meant that the God and Devil realms invasion this time wouldn't be so easy to resist. Qinzong flew in the direction of Star Sword Palace. He wanted to bring the news to them. With Qinzong's speed, it would take some time for him to rush to the Starry Sword Palace. However, everyone in the ancient realm of 10,000 swords had already seen the phenomenon. Those quasi-sages, saints, and a few heaven stage experts naturally knew what it meant. A saint expert had fallen. Moreover, it was a great saint expert who had fallen. For a moment, the four great holy lands and various forces were all shocked and shocked. They were all guessing. In the Starry Sword Palace, the palace master was also a great saint expert. He had gathered a group of sword saints in the main hall of the Starry Sword Palace. A saint has fallen. It was a great saint, but we still don't know who it was. The palace master of the Starry Sword Palace said in a serious tone, "I have an ominous feeling in my heart. Palace master, I can't deduce the specifics of the astrolabe. I can only deduce the phenomenon of the destruction of the stars." A very old great saint expert spoke slowly. He was the oldest expert in the Starry Sword Palace other than the divine ancestor. He cultivated the stellar divination technique, which was very difficult to cultivate in the Starry Sword Palace. His performance in battle was relatively average, but he was best at deduction, especially when paired with the astrolabe of the Starry Sword Palace. The deduction effect was astonishing. However, he couldn't deduce the specifics of the situation. It was obviously beyond the scope of deduction. However, he could only deduce the phenomenon of the destruction of the stars, which represented destruction and death. A great terror was about to descend. What kind of great terror was it? For a moment, the sword saints of the Starry Sword Palace fell silent and pondered. What kind of terrifying thing was about to descend? Suddenly, as if a bolt of lightning had struck, some people's expressions changed drastically as if they had thought of something. At the same time, a voice came from outside the Starry Sword Palace. The peerless sword Saint Qinzong came to visit with an extremely important matter. Quickly invite him in. The palace master of the Starry Sword Palace said immediately. Soon, Qinzong arrived in the Starry Hall. When he saw a group of sword saints, he couldn't help but feel shocked. Collecting his thoughts, Qinzong immediately explained the situation. It is indeed the invasion of the celestial and demonic realms. The palace master of the Starry Sword Palace said in a low voice, "Has that old thing, Soundless, already made his move? I suspect that a divine master has crossed over. Otherwise, the Nine Flame Supreme Sage wouldn't have fallen," Qinzong said in a low voice. If a divine master had really descended, it would be useless even if the Valley Master of the No Return Sword Valley went. Qinzong's words silenced everyone. A divine master. That was at least the divine ancestor level. It was rumored that all-powerful divine masters were even stronger than divine ancestors. Now, we can only invite the great ancestor, a great saint said. The strongest person in the Starry Sword Palace wasn't a great saint, but the Starry Sword Master. Although there was only one such sword master, it was a kind of deterrence, a kind of deterrence. That was a powerful existence at the divine ancestor level, whose strength had reached the pinnacle of the saint level. Under normal circumstances, sword masters wouldn't appear at all. They were all cultivating to pursue a higher level, although it seemed like an illusory existence. Soon, Qinzong felt an indescribable aura permeating the air. It was a supreme aura of the way of the sword. It was as if the aura of the way of the sword dominated everything, as if the way of the sword in the world had to bow down before it. I'll go and take a look. A voice came from above the hall and into everyone's ears. The voice sounded old, but it also seemed to be full of vitality. Everyone immediately left the hall and looked towards the sky. They only saw a wisp of star-like sword light that flickered with incomparable brilliance as it instantly tore through the sky. Its speed was simply indescribable, and Qinzong estimated that its speed was at least 10 times faster than his maximum speed, or even more. The moment Qinzong looked at it, he felt a shocking sword power. It was as distant as the stars in the sky, but it was also blazing. It was extremely shocking. It was a sword master level expert, the strongest existence in the Starry Sword Palace, the Starry Sword Master. In the blink of an eye, the Starry Sword Master disappeared without a trace before everyone's eyes. Then, 2 great saint-level experts from the Starry Sword Palace flew into the sky and turned into 2 starlight. They exploded with extreme speed and flew in the direction of the Starry Sword Master. Fast, extremely fast. Even though the Starry Sword Master had taken action, if the Fiend God world really invaded, it wouldn't only be divine masters who would cross over. Other spiritual god-level fiend gods would also cross over. Even righteous god-level fiend gods and demigod-level fiend gods would also cross over. I still have to go to the Myriad Swords Mountain and Solitary Sword Villa. Goodbye, Qinzong immediately said to the others from the Starry Sword Palace. Then, he looked at Strange Sword Saint and said, Senior, when I left, your descendant was still fine. However, the matter is urgent. Forgive me for not being able to fulfill the agreement. It's fine. Strange Sword Saint's temper was straightforward, but he wasn't unreasonable. As for his descendant, it wasn't that important at this time. He directly ordered a quasi-saint from the Starry Sword Palace to go over and pick him up. If he died, it would be unfortunate. There was nothing they could do about it. What's the agreement? The Starry Sword Palace master asked curiously. Help me teach a junior swordsmanship for 10 years. If he passes the test, I'll give him a place to cultivate in the Star Secret Land. Strange Sword Saint didn't hide anything and directly replied. Qinzong, you can enter the Star Secret Land at any time. The Starry Sword Palace Master immediately said, Thank you, Palace Master. However, I still have to go to the Solitary Sword Villa and the Myriad Swords Mountain. Qinzong was vaguely excited. However, he still said that the matter was urgent. As the person involved, he had to do his best. Yes, this matter is of great importance. Strange Sword Saint, go to the Solitary Sword Villa and the Myriad Swords Mountain first to inform them. The Starry Sword Palace Master immediately said. Strange Sword Saint was a great saint expert. His speed was naturally not something Qinzong could compare with. At least, the difference was several times. If Strange Sword Saint went to inform them, it would undoubtedly be faster. Qinzong naturally had no objection to such an arrangement. Strange Sword Saint also had no objection. As such, Strange Sword Saint directly set off to the Solitary Sword Villa that was closer to the Myriad Swords Mountain and directly informed them. The Divine Demon world had never really invaded. This was the first time. As for Qin Muxue, a quasi-sage went to pick her up. As for Qinzong, he stayed in the Starry Sword Palace and prepared to enter the Star Secret Land to cultivate and comprehend in the Star Secret Land. Qinzong didn't know what kind of opportunities were contained in the Star Secret Land. However, it was the most important cultivation holy land in the Starry Sword Palace. It was definitely extraordinary. He only hoped that he could comprehend some mysteries from it, whether it was swordsmanship or swordsmanship. Of course, it would be best if he could comprehend the next step of his inner world cultivation. However, Qinzong still didn't know what exactly it was. No matter what, he just had to enter first. Chapter 3029. Above the horizon, a sword light streaked across the sky like a star. Its speed seemed to be able to transcend time and space. Not long after, it crossed the Green Sword City and charged into the dense forest 100 miles away. It also saw the pitch-black crack. At this moment, the crack had expanded to a length of 30 meters and a width of more than 10 meters. It stood on the ground and constantly spewed out black smoke, shrouding the surroundings and covering a radius of 10,000 meters. A figure stood within it. At first glance, it seemed to be a few hundred meters tall. It stood between the heavens and the earth and was extremely majestic, like an ancient demonic mountain that could not be shaken. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that it was not a few hundred meters tall, but only a few meters tall. It was just that its power was so strong that it created a visual impact. A divine master. It was the divine master who held a long black staff. He was guarding the space-time portal, which was the so-called divine demon gate. When the divine demon gate was completely stabilized, a large number of divine demon experts would cross over and invade the ancient mysterious world. Before that, they had to ensure that the divine demon gate would not be destroyed. Even if a small saint could not destroy it, it did not mean that a great saint could not do it. Moreover, there were still some divine ancestor experts in the ancient mysterious world who had the fighting power of a divine master. The star sword master stood in the sky, and his eyes seemed to have stars flowing in them. They pierced through the black smoke and locked onto the divine master. Then, the star sword master raised his fingers and pointed his index and middle fingers together like a sword in the void. Every time he pointed his sword, a cold light would appear in the void. It was like the stars in the sky were twinkling. In the next moment, every cold light seemed to explode and shot out an extremely sharp and fast ray. It pierced through the clouds and the moon and pierced through the black smoke. It tore through the smoke like a hot knife through butter and went straight for the divine master who held the staff. The divine master roared and the long black staff shook. The surrounding space vibrated and was suddenly raised. It carried an extremely terrifying power that seemed to be able to shatter stars as it blasted towards the incoming star sword chi. One after another, the star sword chi shot towards the divine master, but were continuously shattered. Then, the star sword master slashed out with his fingers, and a dazzling starlight condensed in the sky. His aura locked onto the divine master and then shot down. It was like a meteor, but it carried with it an earth-shattering sword power. The divine master's expression was solemn. The long black staff expanded by 10 times in an instant. It carried a divine power that could destroy heaven and earth as it smashed out. The divine master wielding the black staff was a divine ancestor. Naturally, the star sword master was also a divine ancestor. However, among the divine ancestors of the ancient Xian world, the star sword master's strength was above average. He was also a sword cultivator. His offensive ability was extremely shocking. The goal of the divine master was to protect the divine devil gate behind him from being destroyed. Now, the divine devil gate was even more sturdy, but it was still unable to truly withstand the all-out attack of a divine master. However, as long as it was completely stabilized, a divine master's attack would not be able to do anything to it. Strange Sword Elder was a great saint expert. He was extremely fast, like a meteor streaking across the sky. He quickly arrived at the Great Sword Villa. His reputation was much more useful than Qinzong's. After all, he was a great saint expert and an expert from the Star Sword Palace. Once he arrived at the Great Sword Villa, he was immediately received with extremely high standards. However, Strange Sword Elder was not there as a guest. He came with important news. After informing the Great Sword Villa of the invasion of the celestial and demon world and the fall of the 9 Flame Supreme Sage, he left for the 10,000 Swords Mountain again. There were quite a number of saint experts in the 10,000 Swords ancient domain. There were dozens of small saints and great saints. They were undoubtedly a very powerful force. If they could deal with the invasion of the celestial and demon world on their own, it would undoubtedly be better. In short, the news had to be spread to all the saint experts and quasi-saints in the 10,000 Swords ancient domain. As for whether to spread the news to other domains, it would be decided when the time came. If the 10,000 Swords ancient domain alone was enough to repel the invasion of the celestial and demon world, it would greatly increase the reputation of the 10,000 Swords ancient domain. The celestial and demon world was very strong, and the celestial and demon world were very powerful. This was publicly acknowledged. However, would a saint expert be afraid because of this? Of course not. Especially sword cultivators, they would not be afraid. Not long after, Strange Sword Elder also arrived at the 10,000 Swords Mountain. This news naturally spread to the 10,000 Swords Mountain. Great Mystery also knew about it long ago. There were quite a number of saint experts in the mysterious ancient world. Although not all of them joined Great Mystery, not even half of them, it was still not a small number. The fall of the Nine-Flame Supreme Sage was quickly known to the people of Great Mystery. After knowing the reason, they also knew about the invasion of the celestial and demon world. They immediately mobilized, causing the 10,000 Swords ancient domain's plan to deal with this matter with their own strength to fail. This was because the experts of Great Mystery came from all over the mysterious ancient world and were not limited to just one domain. The invasion of the celestial and demon world. This news spread to the ears of the saint experts of each domain at an astonishing speed. However, many of them did not have a clear understanding of the celestial and demon world. They only knew of their existence and heard that they were very strong. As for how strong they were, they did not have a direct understanding because they had never come into contact with them. As a saint expert, they had their own confidence. Under the situation where they did not see the truth, they were not that cautious about the invasion of the celestial and demon world. However, because of the fall of the Nine-Flame Supreme Sage, the atmosphere of the entire mysterious ancient world unconsciously became solemn. Even the cultivators with low cultivation base could not help but feel the change in the atmosphere. As for the peddlers and pawns, they could not help but feel that the atmosphere seemed to have become more oppressive, causing them to be more cautious when they spoke or did things. Starsword Palace was one of the 4 great holy lands of the 10,000 Swords ancient domain. It was a powerful holy land second only to the 10,000 Swords Mountain. In the entire mysterious ancient world, it could be considered as a strong holy land. Compared to the ancient Phoenix Mountain, it was not inferior at all. After all, the ancient Phoenix Mountain only had 1 great saint realm expert, while Starsword Palace had 4 great saints. There was 1 sword master for great saint realm experts and more than a dozen pristine saint realm experts. This was the number of top-notch experts in Starsword Palace. However, this number was still slightly inferior to Myriad Swords Mountain. It was about the same as Non-Return Sword Valley and Solitary Sword Villa. This was also the strength of the holy lands in the ancient regions. As for the other big regions, the holy lands were relatively weaker. The ancient Phoenix Mountain only had 1 great saint. However, the ancient Phoenix Mountain's bloodline was extremely shocking. Their battle prowess was incomparably shocking. The Star's secret grounds were the most important cultivation grounds of the Starsword Palace. If one didn't contribute anything to the Starsword Palace, it wouldn't be easy to enter. But now, Chunzong, an outsider, had obtained the opportunity to enter. The Star's secret place was like a small world. After Chunzong stepped in, he stood under the sky. The sky was dark like the night sky. The surroundings were empty and boundless. As Chunzong stepped in, a dot of light flickered in the dark sky. It was the starlight. Soon after, under Chunzong's gaze, specks of starlight appeared one after another, increasing in number. In a short span of a dozen breaths, hundreds of specks of starlight had appeared in the night sky, flickering and twinkling. However, the starlight continued to appear. Not long after, there were more than 1,000 dots. However, the number was still increasing. There were more and more dots, denser and denser, almost covering the entire night sky. Chunzong also realized that as more and more starlight appeared in the night sky, a mysterious feeling began to spread out and spread. A trace of indescribable feeling also spread and lingered in his heart. Chunzong stared at the twinkling stars in the sky with full concentration. His mind seemed to be in a trance for a moment. Chunzong was surprised to find that there were already tens of thousands of dots of starlight in the sky. They did not seem to be real starlight, but sword light. The sword light lingered in the night sky like starlight. As it flickered, it emitted a shocking sword power. It was so subtle that it was difficult to detect. If it was not for Chenzong's superb perception, which was far superior to many pristine Saint Realm experts, it would be difficult for him to sense anything. In an instant, one of the dots of starlight suddenly flickered more intensely. It suddenly fell like a meteor falling from the sky. The shocking sword power also burst out and directly locked onto Chenzong. He could not dodge it. Chenzong immediately had a feeling that he could not dodge it no matter what. He pulled out his sword without hesitation and lifted it up. The sword light was subtle but shocking. In an instant, the sword light came into contact with the starlight that fell from the sky. Chenzong immediately felt the sword tremble as if there was a peerless sword cultivator attacking him with his sword. A tyrannical sword power burst out, and the starlight was also broken by Chenzong's sword. Immediately, two rays of starlight sword chi fell directly locked onto Chenzong. Chenzong kept waving his sword to break the starlight sword chi. Gradually, he had a feeling of enlightenment. These starlight sword chi fell from different angles and directions. Moreover, they fell faster and faster, and the interval between them was getting shorter and shorter. Since he was locked onto, he could not dodge at all. He could only raise his sword to meet the attack. However, his swordsmanship was unconsciously guided. In other words, it was a kind of guidance that guided his swordsmanship to change. It was no longer the single-hearted swordsmanship. This was because when Chenzong wanted to perform the single-hearted swordsmanship to resist the starlight attack, it was fine in the beginning. However, as time went on, he felt more and more awkward. It felt like he was forced to perform it, and it became jerky. However, as long as he made a slight change and performed the swordsmanship according to a kind of guidance, it would become very smooth. The sword light also changed, as if the starlight was shining. The single-hearted swordsmanship allowed Chenzong to divide his mind to think. As he performed the swordsmanship continuously, Chenzong gradually mastered this new swordsmanship that was different from the single-hearted swordsmanship, but was also very amazing. The sword was like a star, and there was a kind of amazing power condensed in it that could be continuously superimposed. Chenzong could not help but associate it with the supreme, secret swordsmanship of the Starry Sword Palace. It was called the Great Starry 10,000 Sword Art, and it was an extremely excellent swordsmanship. It was said that it was not inferior to the myriad transformation sword art of the Myriad Swords Mountain. Chenzong could not help but show a touch of joy on his face. This level of swordsmanship was not inferior to his single-hearted swordsmanship at all. It might even be better. Chapter 30:30. Chenzong did not expect that he had unknowingly mastered the supreme, secret swordsmanship of the Star Sword Palace. The prodigious star Myriad Sword Art. The Myriad Sword Ancient Domain was a place for sword practitioners. It was the holy land for sword practitioners in the ancient mysterious world. There was more than one famous swordsmanship in the ancient mysterious world. For example, the four great holy lands all had their own supreme, secret swordsmanship. The Myriad Transformation Sword Art of the Myriad Swords Mountain, the prodigious star Myriad Sword Art of the Star Sword Palace, the No-Return Sword Art of the Non-Return Sword Valley, and the Absolute Heaven and Earth Absolute Sword Art of the Great Sword Villa were all famous in the ancient mysterious world. No matter which domain a sword practitioner was in, when they talked about the supreme swordsmanship, the four swordsmanship would definitely be among them. Of course, in a vast, ancient, mysterious world, there were not only four supreme secret swordsmanship, but also in other domains. However, there were no more than 10 supreme secret swordsmanship. In the hundreds of domains in the ancient, mysterious world, there were no more than 10 supreme secret swordsmanship. 4 of them were in the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain, which was amazing. It also explained the amazing foundation of the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. As for the other 2 supreme secret swordsmanship of the Myriad Swords Mountain, the Immaculate Heaven Sword Art and the Dark Light Will Sword Art, although they were also famous, they were more limited in the Myriad Sword Ancient Domain. Like the spiritual sword art, they could not really be famous in the ancient, mysterious world. However, it was undeniable that whether it was the Immaculate Heaven Sword Art, the Dark Light Will Sword Art, or the spiritual sword art, they were all very profound swordsmanship in essence. What they lacked was an opportunity to be famous. However, in the final analysis, there was still a gap between them and the Four Supreme's secret swordsmanship. The more he attacked, the more Qinzong felt that this swordsmanship was unfathomable. It was as if there were countless stars in the sky, and he could not see the bottom line of this swordsmanship. Qinzong was more and more certain that this should be the Stellar Sword Palace's supreme secret technique, the Stellar Myriad Sword Art. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so profound and unfathomable that it made him gasp in amazement. After all, he still hadn't performed it completely, or it should be said that he had been guided to complete it. Even so, Qinzong already felt that this swordsmanship was more profound than the Taihao swordsmanship of the first Taihao swordsmanship. It should be noted that the Taihao swordsmanship was even better than the spiritual rhino swordsmanship. However, if one thought about it carefully, it was not impossible. The Taihao sword art was indeed the work of the first Taihao sword art, and the first Taihao sword art was indeed outstanding. However, the Star Sword Palace had been a holy land for a longer period of time than the Taihao Mountain. Moreover, the ancestor of the Star Sword Palace was also a sword cultivator of unparalleled talent. His talent was not inferior to the first Taihao sword art in the slightest, or even better. All in all, compared to the first Taihao sword art, the Stellar Myriad sword art had been improved to the present and surpassed the Taihao sword art after countless refinements and improvements. After the tens of thousands of starlights had been shot out, Qinzong had also mastered the prodigious Stellar Myriad sword art under its guidance. Although he was not particularly proficient in it, it was not difficult for him to perform it. However, even with Qinzong's strong mind, he still felt a sense of weariness, as if his mind was haggard. The Stellar Myriad sword art was unfathomable and very complicated. It was an ultimate example of turning simplicity into complexity. The sword movements that were performed were thousands of times more. No martial arts technique could get rid of complexity and simplicity. Complexity was complicated and changeable, while simplicity was direct and sharp. Each had its own characteristics. However, in most cases, what practitioners pursued was to turn complexity into simplicity. Although complexity was very beautiful and confusing, most of the time, it represented a low level. Almost all practitioners would embark on the path of turning complexity into simplicity. Turning complexity into simplicity often represented returning to simplicity. It was a kind of refinement after removing impurities. It represented improvement, a transformation from a low level to a high level. However, the Stellar Myriad sword art was not so. At least, the level that Qinzong had mastered was not so. It was complexity as complex as the stars. There were close to 10,000 or even 10,000 moves. Every move was different. Perhaps some moves looked the same, but there were indeed differences in the technique of exerting force. It was impossible to tell just by looking at it. Only by personally practicing it would one be able to understand. What a broad and profound swordsmanship. After reviewing it in his mind, Qinzong could not help but sigh. Looking at the starry sky, the feeling of shock in his heart became more and more intense. The more he experienced and comprehended it, the more he could feel the magnificence of this swordsmanship. Indeed, it was magnificent. It was a kind of magnificent and majestic momentum, which made Qinzong feel shocked. 10,000 moves might sound frightening, but the mysteries contained within each move were different. If one were to carefully comprehend them and delve deeper, they would discover how shocking the mysteries were. Qinzong felt as if he was peeling vegetables. Layer by layer, the more he peeled, the deeper and more profound the mysteries were. Qinzong felt as if he had found a treasure. Compared with his single-hearted swordsmanship, there was still a big gap between it and his. The swordsmanship path of the Stellar Myriad sword art was similar to Qinzong's single-hearted swordsmanship. It seemed to be a myriad of swords, but there seemed to be some differences. However, there was one thing that was necessary. If one wanted to learn the Stellar Myriad sword art, one must have a deep understanding of swordsmanship. Otherwise, one would not be able to master it. This swordsmanship was the highest secret of Star Sword Palace. Those who were not from Star Sword Palace, or even those who were not important to Star Sword Palace, were not qualified to comprehend it, let alone cultivate it. Moreover, this swordsmanship was too profound and unfathomable. Even those who were qualified to comprehend it might not be able to learn it. The place to comprehend this swordsmanship was in the Star's secret land. Eccentric Sword Saint and Star Sword Palace's palace master had agreed to let Qinzong enter the Star's secret zone to study it. They believed from the bottom of their hearts that Qinzong would not be able to comprehend the complete stellar myriad layers sword technique. At most, he would only be able to comprehend part of the sword technique's profundities. This was also the case for most of the cultivators from Star Sword Palace. They did not mind if Qinzong comprehended a little bit of the mystery. However, Qinzong did not comprehend a little bit of the mystery. Instead, he comprehended all of the mystery. At present, there were not many people from Starry Sword Palace who had grasped the prodigious astral myriad layers sword technique. Every one of them had to take one step at a time to cultivate the other sword techniques of Starry Sword Palace. They had to constantly accumulate experience before finally comprehending and cultivating the prodigious astral myriad layers sword technique. Qinzong, on the other hand, did not have the other sword techniques of Starry Sword Palace as a foundation. However, Qinzong had a high level of comprehension. He had the single-hearted swordsmanship from the path of million swords and sect and the assistance of the single-hearted sutra. Qinzong had comprehended the stellar myriad sword art from the single-hearted swordsmanship. What he lacked was a further mastery. In the Star's secret land, Qinzong began a practice. Practicing 10,000 moves of the stellar myriad sword art was not a trivial matter. On the contrary, it consumed a lot of energy and time. However, after practicing, Qinzong had a deeper understanding of this swordsmanship. Stars, all things. All things were like stars. This was Qinzong's new understanding. Even if he abandoned his single-hearted swordsmanship and focused on the stellar myriad sword art, Qinzong believed that his strength in swordsmanship would not decrease at all. Instead, it would increase. However, Qinzong would not make such a decision. The single-hearted swordsmanship was his main swordsmanship. All other swordsmanships existed to perfect and improve the single-hearted swordsmanship. Of course, Qinzong would not underestimate a supreme secret swordsmanship like the stellar myriad sword art. Instead, he paid great attention to it and tried his best to comprehend and master it to the extreme. In addition to perfecting and improving the single-hearted swordsmanship, it could also have an unexpected effect when used in battle. The Star's secret land was of great help to the comprehension and cultivation of the stellar myriad sword art. When practicing here, Qinzong found that his comprehension efficiency was amazing. Every time he practiced, the mysteries of the stellar myriad sword art would emerge. As he continued to deepen his comprehension, his mastery of the stellar myriad sword art became more and more profound. However, after practicing more than 10 times, Qinzong found that he had reached a bottleneck and could not continue to comprehend. Qinzong was not surprised. This was normal. If he wanted to comprehend more and deeper mysteries, he would need more time and energy. Putting aside the swordsmanship for the time being, Qinzong carefully observed again. The mysteries of the Star's secret land should not stop there. Under Qinzong's gaze, the tens of thousands of stars in the night sky flickered incessantly, as if they were blinking eyes, hiding deep mysteries. As he stared, Qinzong gradually felt a sense of absent-mindedness. It seemed as if the tens of thousands of starlights were gradually dimming, as if the lights were extinguished. Qinzong couldn't help but focus his mind even more. He stared even more carefully, but the speed of the starlights dimming seemed to be faster. In less than 10 breaths of time, the starlight in the entire night sky had completely vanished. It was as if they had never appeared in the first place. However, Qinzong also discovered that the night sky seemed to have become even darker and deeper. It seemed to contain some sort of indescribable profundity that was deeply hidden within, making it impossible to see through. The more it was so, the more Qinzong felt a strong desire in his heart. He wanted to see the secrets in the dark night sky and see through them. However, the more he wanted to, the more difficult it was to see through them. Qinzong took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He didn't try to gather himself, but his mind became more and more focused. Qinzong was sure that this was the first time he had been so focused. It was unprecedented. Suddenly, the mind that had been condensed to the extreme seemed to be unable to bear the burden. It finally could not bear it and directly exploded. There was a loud bang, but it was directly inside Qinzong's body. At that moment, Chinzong felt as if he had exploded, exploding from the inside out. His mind began to detonate, and everything in his body exploded and exploded. It was a horrifying feeling. His whole body seemed to have been smashed into pieces in this explosion, leaving only a little bit of spiritual light, which floated up and down involuntarily. Chapter 30-31. Explosion. The explosion caused by the extreme concentration of his mind spread to his whole body. His body, spirit, essence, chi, spirit, and everything else exploded, directly exploding into dust and powder. In the end, only a little bit of divine light was left. A little bit of confused divine light seemed to carry Chinzong's consciousness. It floated and swayed, like a dandelion blown away by the wind. It flew into the night sky with a gust of wind, as if it had fallen into eternal darkness. The consciousness contained in the divine light had a kind of hazy feeling, as if it was half asleep and half awake, like a mayfly drifting with the waves in the water. It did not know when it would completely wake up. Amidst the haze, Chinzong seemed to be able to see the explosion of the stars. The shock wave from the explosion spread out crazily, causing layers of rings of stars to spread out continuously. The might of the explosion was simply unimaginable. In the outer universe, under the full blow of an expert of the great saint realm, it could indeed break a star and cause it to explode. However, the explosion of the star was indirect. It was the decay caused by the destruction of its core, rather than the complete destruction of the star with a direct blow. That level of power was too amazing. It was estimated that even a divine ancestor could not do it. The impact of the explosion of a star made Chinzong's divine light suddenly tremble. It seemed to be very excited, but it did not completely wake up because of this. It was just that a trace of faintly discernible understanding was quietly remembered by Chinzong's subconscious. That light carried Chinzong's hazy consciousness and seemed to wander in the dark universe. It was like a small fish that had entered the boundless ocean. It wandered aimlessly in all directions. It didn't know where it came from, and it didn't know where it was going. It just swam like this, and wherever it went, it was where it was. It did not know when it would wake up. From time to time, Chinzong saw the explosion of the star and also saw the birth of the star. From a little bit of light, it was constantly growing, constantly absorbing the invisible dust in the dark universe, constantly condensing, and finally turning into a behemoth, entrenched in the darkness of the universe. The dark universe contained endless mysteries. Chinzong's divine light continued to wander around in it, and he found more and more of its mysteries. Astonishing mysteries, indescribable mysteries. It was infinitely profound. Here, his hazy consciousness couldn't feel the passage of time at all. He didn't know how much time had passed, and it seemed like he would never wake up. A figure stepped into the secret place and saw Chinzong, who was standing still. At this moment, Chinzong seemed to have turned into a statue. He stood straight and looked up at the sky. The sky was dark, so dark that it was incomparably deep. The man's expression suddenly changed, but he didn't want to disturb Chinzong. After observing for a while, he left decisively. Palace Lord, Chinzong is still meditating in the secret land of Star. He should have entered the phaseless star realm. After leaving the star's secret land, this person hurried to the Star Palace Hall to inform the Star Sword Palace Master. Phaseless Star Realm? The Star Sword Palace Master couldn't help but be stunned. His expression changed slightly, and after repeating the words, he asked, "Are you sure? I've been observing for a long time, and I'm pretty sure." This person was a pristine Saint Stage expert from Star Sword Palace. After pondering for a few breaths, he replied with certainty. Unbelievable. The Star Sword Palace Master paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. His face was filled with surprise, and he seemed to be pondering. To enter the phaseless star realm, one must have an extremely profound understanding of the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art. The phaseless star realm was the most profound state that the people of Star Sword Palace would enter when they entered the star's secret area to comprehend. In this state, they would have an extraordinary comprehension, and they would be able to see the mysteries of the universe more clearly. When one broke out of that state, one would usually advance by leaps and bounds. For example, the Star Sword Palace Master remembered that when he was still at the pristine Saint Stage, he had entered the phaseless star realm and maintained it for dozens of years. He had a very profound and broad understanding. After he woke up, he began to cultivate in seclusion. When he came out of seclusion, he had already broken through his limit and ascended to the great saint stage. In the history of Star Sword Palace, every cultivator who could enter the phaseless star realm would have a great harvest after they woke up. They would either break through from the pristine saint stage to the great saint stage or take a step forward in the great saint stage. In the past, there had been cultivators from outside the Star Sword Palace who had entered the Star Secret area, such as the people from the other 3 Holy Lands. However, none of them had been able to enter the phaseless star realm because the prerequisite to entering the phaseless star realm was to grasp the prodigious astral myriad sword technique and comprehend it to a certain extent. Now that Qinzong had entered the phaseless star realm, did it not mean that Qinzong had comprehended and mastered the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art to a certain extent? It was simply unbelievable. A rogue cultivator who was not from Star Sword Palace was actually able to comprehend the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art on his first time entering the Star Secret Land. It was simply unbelievable. The Star Sword Palace master suddenly felt that he had suffered a great loss. The prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art was the supreme secret sword technique of Star Sword Palace. It was also the fundamental inheritance of Star Sword Palace. Many tyrannical absolute arts relied on the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art. It was like the existence of a soul. Now, it was comprehended and mastered by an outsider. For a moment, he was not sure what kind of feeling it was. The palace master of the Starry Sword Palace immediately decided to personally enter the Star Mystery Realm to confirm whether or not Qinzong had entered the Phaseless Stars realm. If he had, then the significance behind this would be extremely shocking, and they had to take action. Such a stunning talent must not be allowed to slip away just like that. Time passed quickly. The invasion of the Divine Devil World became more and more intense. The Divine Devil World seemed to want to invade the ancient, profound world at all costs because there was one very important thing, and that was faith. Other than their own cultivation, the Divine Devil World had another way to increase their strength, and that was faith. Compared to self-cultivation, the power of faith was more efficient and faster. It was precisely because of this that the gods and demons wanted to establish faith. However, the faith in the god and demon world was limited and had long been divided up. Naturally, the gods and demons set their sights on the ancient mystic world, but after repeated failures, they also set their sights on the outer universe. Now that they had finally opened the space-time door to the ancient profound world, they naturally would not give up. They would do their best to guard the door and let more divine Devil World Masters enter. The ancient profound world side would not let the divine Devil World Masters enter smoothly. A war was inevitable. The entire forest was completely destroyed in the war, and Greensword City was affected. The people of Greensword City had long moved away. The Mountain Sword City Lord who did not pay attention to the invasion of the divine Devil World and did not report it was also punished. He was killed by a sword saint. When he was about to die, he regretted it and begged for mercy. However, it was too late. Although there was no loss, a mistake was a mistake, and a mistake had to be made. And the price was heavy. If not for Qinzong having the Supreme Mystery Token, this time would have been delayed. At that time, the 10,000 Sword Ancient Realm would have suffered heavy losses. The death of the Mountain Sword City Lord did not cause much of stir. He was just a Heaven Realm Great Extreme. It was nothing. The situation was very intense. The Divine Devil World was determined to invade the ancient profound world and open up a land of faith. However, this was destined to be a difficult and bloody process. First, they would use their powerful force to conquer the new world. Then, they would develop faith. Faith had always been built on the blood and bones of countless people. Fight, fight, fight. The 10,000 Sword Ancient Realms Saint-level Masters were constantly mobilized to resist the invasion of the Divine Devil World. There were even Saint-level Masters from other realms who crossed over. More than half of the Supreme Mystery Realms Masters were also here to resist the invasion of the Divine Devil World. On the whole, the Divine Devil World was stronger than the Ancient Profound World. However, they could not immediately conquer the Ancient Profound World. It was just a space-time portal. It was not easy to pass through it. There were more or less restrictions. This made it harder for the divine devil world to invade the ancient profound world. Coupled with the ancient profound world's strong resistance, the invasion of the divine devil world was also stopped. Fierce battles broke out one after another from time to time. They were all battles between saints, and every battle was a battle of life and death. Relatively speaking, the saint-level masters of the ancient profound world had the home ground advantage. The divine devil world was naturally stronger. With a dense forest as the center, the Greensword City was also covered. It was all turned into a battlefield. Even the Mountain Sword City that was further away was affected. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Such battles were fierce and dangerous. The divine devil world masters were not unkillable. The price of invading was death. However, at the same time, the human cultivators also suffered losses. However, Chenzong was unaware of all this. He was completely immersed in the star's secret place of the Star Sword Palace. The Star Sword Palace Master had been immersed in the phaseless star realm for decades before he woke up. After he woke up, he went into seclusion and directly broke through from the small saint realm to the great saint realm. Chenzong had been immersed in the phaseless star realm for more than 50 years, but he was still not awake. At this time, he was about to surpass the Star Sword Palace Master. 60 years, 70 years. When 70 years passed, the Star Sword Palace Master was shocked. This had already surpassed him. He became more and more determined. 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. The moment he reached 100 years, Chenzong's spiritual light suddenly shone brightly. It was as if his half-asleep consciousness had also awakened in an instant. Thousands of mysteries appeared, one after another like the waves of the sea, continuous and unending. For a time, Chenzong could only feel countless mysteries emerging. The spiritual light also fell from the darkness with his consciousness. Like a falling meteor, it directly sank into the top of his head and returned to his body. His body, which had not moved for over 100 years, regained its vitality in an instant. Strands of vitality appeared as Chenzong's body moved. Kacha-kacha sounds constantly rang out as Chenzong's body moved, spreading out. The heaven and earth in Chenzong's body began to circulate again. Strands of powerful aura spread out and rushed in all directions. In the next moment, Chenzong's dim eyes flashed and emitted a cold light. Chapter 30-32. In the star's secret place, the night sky was dark and boundless. Chenzong's eyes flickered with light. Within his eyes, there seemed to be thousands of stars twinkling endlessly. It was so dense and so magnificent. Thousands of mysteries were circulating within his eyes without rest. 100 years of time had turned into a speck of light that wandered through the dark starry sky. Amidst the haziness, the half-asleep consciousness had seen many mysteries. The mysteries of the universe were deeply engraved in his heart, as if they had been branded. His cultivation base was still complete. His mixed yuan heart force was still the same. There was no improvement, but Chenzong knew that his strength had become stronger. His single-hearted sword principle had greatly improved. Vaguely, I already know how to break through to the next realm. What I lack is an opportunity, Chenzong thought. Immediately, Chenzong left the star's secret place. Countless mysteries lingered in his heart and filled his mind. They were like imprinted tracks that Chenzong constantly comprehended and completely turned into his own. Even if he did not go into seclusion, it would not affect him. How was the invasion of the demon world? Had they been defeated, or had they really been invaded? In addition, he seemed to have spent many years in the star's secret place. Where was Yinshin? Had he come out of seclusion? Thinking of this, Chenzong immediately left the star's secret place and met the Star Sword Palace Master. Greetings, Palace Master. Chenzong saluted the Star Sword Palace Master. Whether it was status or the most important cultivation base and strength, the Star Sword Palace Master was superior to him. Little friend, did you learn a sword technique in the secret star land? The Star Sword Palace Master's eyes were shining with a strange light. He had a feeling that he wanted to see through Chenzong. I did comprehend a sword principle, Chenzong admitted directly. That is the supreme secret of our Star Sword Palace, the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art. The Star Sword Palace Master said in a faint voice, There are very few people in our Star Sword Palace who can master the prodigious stellar thousand-layer sword art. It is my honor to be able to comprehend the prodigious astral myriad sword art. Zhong replied immediately. Although he was not sure what the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace meant, Zhong felt that the Palace Master had some sort of plan or goal. Zhong didn't know what the purpose was, but Zhong wouldn't be taken in because of that. Generally speaking, comprehending someone else's supreme sword technique was like taking away someone else's legacy treasure. One would always feel guilty and embarrassed, as if one owed someone a favor. There were big and small favors, but learning another person's supreme sword technique was not a small favor. Such a favor was not easy to return. It was a debt, a very big debt. Zhong knew this very well. Of course, he wouldn't agree to it so stupidly. At the end of the day, there were two reasons why he could comprehend it. Firstly, it was directly related to the Star's secret land. Secondly, it was because his swordsmanship foundation was extremely solid and his comprehension was extremely high, coupled with the assistance of the Heart Sutra. Without any of these, it was impossible to comprehend the complete prodigious astral myriad sword art. In other words, Zhong had comprehended and mastered it with his own ability, not with someone else's charity. Of course, this was still inseparable from the Star's secret land, and it could be said that it was closely related to it. Zhong would not deny it, and he was also grateful for it. However, it was impossible for him to restrict himself because of this. The Palace Master of Star Sword Palace couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. This young man's answer didn't follow the usual routine. He originally thought that the other party was young, a few hundred years old. Compared to himself, the other party was indeed very young. He planned to use words to scare the other party before making a plan. He didn't expect the other party to be so natural, as if it was a matter of course for him to comprehend it with his own ability. Suddenly, the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace smiled and said again, "Little friend, the prodigious astral myriad sword art is the supreme secret of Star Sword Palace. In the past, there were people outside of Star Sword Palace who entered the Star's secret land to comprehend it. But at most, they could only comprehend some of the mysteries of the prodigious astral myriad sword art. It's not surprising. I'm not telling you this to get back the prodigious astral myriad sword art. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do it," the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace said honestly. This was also the truth. Swordsmanship wasn't equal to cultivation. Once one learned it, it was an instinct of the body. One's cultivation could be abolished, but how could one's swordsmanship be abolished? Of course, it was not impossible. If the person was crippled or killed, then the swordsmanship would naturally be gone and would not be able to be used. However, it would directly cripple everything and not just the swordsmanship. "Palace Master, please speak." Zhong knew that the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace must have a purpose. "Little friend, not only have you learned the prodigious astral myriad layers sword technique, you have also entered the phaseless astral realm for 100 years. I would like to invite you to join the Stellar Sword Palace as an elder of the Stellar Sword Palace." The Stellar Sword Palace's Palace Master said seriously, "Thank you for your kindness, Palace Master. However, I'm not really a rogue cultivator, so I'm not suitable," Zhong replied. He was a member of Taihao Mountain. Even if he left the outer universe and came to the inner universe, it didn't change. "In that case, you could be an honorary elder," the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace said. An honorary elder was different from an elder. It didn't mean that one was completely a member of Star Sword Palace, but it was still considered as at least related. People from other forces could also be honorary elders in other forces. Zhong pondered for a while and agreed. He had also benefited greatly from the secret Star Land, so he was worthy of being an honorary elder of Star Sword Palace. In this way, the Palace Master would feel better. After all, the one who learned the prodigious astral myriad sword art was one of his own. "Palace Master, have I stayed in the secret Star Land for 100 years?" Zhong asked. "Have the gods and demons been defeated?" "No." The Palace Master of Star Sword Palace frowned. Obviously, the things that happened in the past 100 years weren't good. On the contrary, it was terrible. As the Palace Master of Star Sword Palace explained in detail, Zhong finally knew everything that had happened in the secret Star Land for 100 years. 100 years ago, He was the first to discover the invasion of the celestial and demon realm. It was also the beginning of the fall of the 9 Flame Supreme Sage. After that, the Valley Master of Non-Return Sword Valley took action, followed by the Sword Master of Star Sword Palace. However, they didn't break the space-time gate of the celestial and demon realm, nor could they stop the invasion. This time, the celestial and demon realm was determined to invade the ancient mystic world and were not afraid of death. In the past 100 years, the invading celestial and demon realm experts and the ancient mystic world's experts had fought dozens of times. Each battle didn't necessarily determine life and death, but there were always casualties. In the past 100 years, the celestial and demon realm had lost more than 10 righteous god realm experts and 2 spirit god realm experts. None of the divine master realm experts died, but one divine master was seriously injured and retreated to the celestial and demon realm. As for the ancient mystic world, there were 7 little saint realm experts who died, and 3 great saint realm experts, including the 9 Flame Supreme Sage. As for the divine ancestor realm experts, there were no casualties, but 2 of them were injured and were recuperating in seclusion. The area around Green Sword City was now completely occupied by the celestial and demon realm experts. The celestial and demon realm experts had also set up the great celestial and demon realm formation, turning it into an impenetrable fortress. The 100-Year War had also become a tug of war. The experts of the ancient mystic world were not to be trifled with. They had a natural advantage and besieged the celestial and demon realm experts in the area of Green Sword City, preventing them from expanding. It was also not easy for the celestial and demon realm experts to spread their faith. Another important point was that the celestial and demon realm experts couldn't stay in the ancient mystic world for too long, because the ancient mystic world was not the celestial and demon realm. Unless they could develop faith and obtain the power of faith, they could truly gain a foothold in the ancient mystic world. Without the power of faith, they couldn't stay in the ancient mystic world for too long with their strength. They could force themselves to stay in the ancient mystic world, but the longer they stayed, the greater the impact. Because of this, when the celestial and demon realm experts weakened, the power of the great celestial and demon realm experts also weakened. Just half a year ago, the 4 great sword masters of the myriad sword ancient realm, great saint realm, and small saint realm experts all joined forces and finally broke the great celestial and demon realm experts and repelled the celestial and demon realm experts. Without the support of the power of faith, the strength of the celestial and demon realm experts weakened after 100 years. They couldn't hold on any longer and were forced to retreat into the celestial and demon realm. Once the celestial and demon realm experts returned to the celestial and demon realm, their weakened strength would recover. However, the celestial and demon realm experts couldn't be destroyed. Even the 4 great sword masters couldn't do anything to the celestial and demon realm experts. After some research, they found that the celestial and demon realm experts contained a supreme power that surpassed the divine ancestor realm. A power that surpassed the divine ancestor realm. Shinzong couldn't help but frown slightly as he pondered. Through the first Taihao, Shinzong had learned more. There was a level above the divine ancestor realm where one's strength began to transform. It was the power of the first Taihao. After comprehending the second true essence, one's strength would complete the transformation and break through to the demigod realm. After comprehending the third true essence, there was hope to see through the last mystery and become a true god. Then, the power of the celestial and demon realm experts was tyrannical. It might be the power of the demigod realm. As for the true god realm, Chunzong thought it was impossible. According to the first Taihao, the path to God was broken. The path to God was broken, which meant that one couldn't become a true god. As for why the path to God was broken, it was very simple. It was because of a great battle a long, long time ago. In that battle, the strongest experts on both sides broke the heavenly path of the core universe and made it incomplete. The heavenly path was incomplete, and the path to God was broken. Because of this, the Sky Tower was also affected and left a sword mark. Its power was also constantly lost with the passage of time. The path to God was broken. Then, the power of the true God realm should no longer exist. However, how could there be a demigod realm expert in the celestial and demon realm? Shinzong suddenly felt that the celestial and demon realm was even more mysterious. Fortunately, the celestial and demon realm was repelled, but unfortunately, the celestial and demon realm still existed. This meant that the celestial and demon realm would invade again, and the next invasion would be much stronger. The apex that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.